Chapter 441, A Boss is Very Dangerous. Everybody was dumbfounded when they witnessed this. In less than a minute since Eternal Dominion appeared, Southern Lone Blade's entire squad was facing the sky with their backs on the ground, while Southern Lone Blade himself was actually killed off. These 6 men were MMO experts through and through, yet with that one assault, they were left in a state of confusion from this terrible dilemma that they now found themselves in. The remaining 5 players were still lying on the ground, uncertain whether they were better off remaining on the ground or getting up. Death was almost a guarantee if they got up, and staying on the ground would likely see the same result. Was there any chance for them to put up the final struggle and save what face they had left? Not at all. Trying to struggle against someone like Eternal Dominion would just be making matters worse for themselves. So how could they salvage what face they had left? The 6 of them shared the same sentiment on this, and each decided to continue lying on the ground. Even though they were not physically dead, they were already dead in their spirits. Eternal Dominion was obviously in a jovial mood right now as he extended his hand out to young Master Han. "That's 1 kill. Gimme my money." "How much?" young Master Han asked. "I'll let you guys decide it." Eternal Dominion was truly too naive. Thus, young Master Han nodded his head and rummaged through his dimensional pocket. Eternal Dominion happily waited for his payment to arrive. In less than a heartbeat, young Master Han fished out a bottle and placed it in the palm of his hands. Eternal Dominion was stunned. "What's this?" "Liquor for you to drink," young Master Han replied. "Where's the money?" Eternal Dominion asked. "I'm currently broke," young Master Han explained. "Take that bottle as mortgage." "What?" Eternal Dominion was nonplussed. "That bottle right there goes for about 200 gold coins in the tavern." Young Master Han realized that Eternal Dominion must be unfamiliar with the price of the bottle he had in hand. "That's so expensive." Eternal Dominion was naturally surprised. He rarely ever found himself visiting places like the tavern, much less take note of such things, so he was of course unaware that an item like this would be sold for such an exorbitant amount. Now that he was aware that the liquor could be this expensive, he quickly hugged the said bottle securely with both hands and gingerly placed it into his dimensional pocket, as if it were a prized treasure. "To think it is so easy to earn 200 gold coins," Eternal Dominion excitedly thought to himself. It seems that being a professional gamer may indeed be a viable path. After all, Sword Demon and Brother Assist were staring at him incredulously. They simply could not believe the look of contentment Eternal Dominion was showing them right now. The sum of 200 gold coins was only enough to hire someone from the streets into taking care of an average player, but what Eternal Dominion had just done was slay the peak expert, Southern Lone Blade. That was at least worth 500 gold coins by itself. Adding the fact that Southern Lone Blade had a squad that rarely left his side, the price should range from 800 gold coins to 1000 gold coins. That was if Sword Demon or Brother Assist were the ones quoting the price. However, Eternal Dominion was fine putting this matter behind him with just the 200 gold coins, and it was not even actual currency, but a bottle of liquor used as a check of sorts. Young Master Han shrugged to the 2 men and showed them an expression saying that it was none of his business. "How about these guys? Do you need me to take care of them?" Eternal Dominion pointed to the 5 remaining players, who had all given up on putting up any semblance of resistance by the looks of things. "No need, we'll take care of them ourselves," young Master Han hurriedly interjected. He could tell that there was no longer a need for a hired help, and all they needed was an executioner. They would truly be wasting money if they needed to employ someone to do something like that for them. Having already lost the will to fight back, Sword Demon heartlessly dispatched these 5 helpless men as he went around to deal the coup de grace. It could be said that Southern Lone Blade's squad of 7 truly had a bout of terrible luck just from this excursion today. Not only had they fallen out from the running as the 5 unyielding experts and the 10 great adepts, all of them had even fallen below level 40, as they all underwent a bout of depression in this short amount of time. Moreover, this was just the losses they had taken from experience alone. How long these men would need to recover from the psychological scars that they had incurred today depended on their individual mental fortitude. Having taken care of Southern Lone Blade and his team, their next target was now the boss. This was a reward that they had chanced upon. Nobody had expected that hunting after Southern Lone Blade would result in such a serendipitous encounter. Those men sure lived up to their namesake as a company of larcenists, Their nose for profit must be an innate talent. Just as everybody was mulling over this thought, two figures appeared from within the fog. One was larger and taller than the other, both hurriedly intruding into their field of vision. These two figures, the taller one wielding a claymore and the smaller one readying his bow, saw the many people around and yelled, "Where's Southern Lone Blade? Get out here and let us settle this in a death match." Everybody turned to regard the pair. "Where's the guy?" War Without Wounds roared. "It already ended," Sword Demon quietly informed the warrior. "What?" both these experts exclaimed in unison, looking all around them as they nervously asked. "Then, what about the boss? That thing is still around here." Sword Demon was a little annoyed. It turned out that the two of them were clearly only concerned about this. Why is Eternal Dominion here as well? War Without Wounds finally spotted Eternal Dominion among them. "Hi, how are you two doing?" Eternal Dominion had just earned 200 gold coins and was beside himself, so he cheerfully greeted the pair the moment War Without Wounds acknowledged him. "Where's the boss?" War Without Wounds and Royal God Call bellowed a question, instead asked Miles. Sword Demon replied. Hence, the two brought their question over the mercenary channel. Gufei was most likely busy dealing with the boss at the moment, since there was no reply for the longest time. Everybody took this chance to eat and replenish their HP and mana as they waited to turn their sights onto the boss. It was at that moment when a weak voice came from some corner of the clearing. "I am the one who found the boss. Limp Hands." When Southern Lone Blade and the rest had given their all for the final gambit and rushed out, Limp Hands had been following right behind them all along, but he had knowingly stepped to the side the moment the battle began in earnest. Sword Demon and the rest had ignored his existence entirely, and even Eternal Dominion had left him alone when he first appeared to pummel everyone down to the ground. The point was that this man had been standing on the sidelines watching the entire battle unfold like an onlooker, seemingly entirely unconcerned with lending a hand to either side. Now that he saw these group of players were planning to make a move for the boss after slaying Southern Lone Blade's squad, he finally could no longer hold back and said something. Everybody turned to stare at him, causing Limp Hands to really feel his hands go limp. After all, he had personally witnessed the expert Southern Lone Blade, who was the very definition of an apex expert to him, turn into a nutcase once he went against these men. That was the point where young Master Han marched up to him and patted him. "Hey, noob, you'd best be on your way back to the city. A boss is very dangerous." Limp Hands felt dejected. He felt dissatisfaction well up in his heart at being treated like this, but what could he do? He could only ask pitifully, "Then, can I at least watch?" Young Master Han did not say a word, opting to show him an indifferent expression. Everybody got ready when Gufei sent out a three-worded message. "Wait a minute." Gufei was truly a beast of efficiency. Just as he finished sending these 3 words, he himself came flying out in the next moment. This time, he looked far more worn down than before. He had been able to block the Shadow Mist Assassin's attacks successfully these last few rounds and merely had problems unloading the excess force that came from each blow, which resulted in him flying out each time. However, this time, there was a clear streak of blood from a wound as he came hurtling out with that attack. Considering how Parallel World's simulation system worked, this amount of blood being drawn meant that Gufei's injury was not negligible, which just showed that he had taken damage from the Shadow Mist Assassin's one strike this time. Young Master Han swiftly bestowed heal on Gufei just as the gray figure from within the fog moved. War Without Wounds yelled loudly, "Here it comes!" before stepping forward in an attempt to block the attack. In the end, in the time it took for him to take that first step, that gray figure in front of him had already darted past. Fortunately, War Without Wounds' mind was quick-witted enough to discern this. His eyes followed the blurring image of the Shadow Mist Assassin and exclaimed, "So fast!" Royal God Call also witnessed the skill of the Shadow Mist Assassin and was equally astonished. He had readied his bow and was about to fire off an arrow, but the Shadow Mist Assassin was simply too fast that he felt dizzy just following it. He could not even get a bead on the boss, so Royal God Call could only release a homing projectile, instead, which ended up whizzing past it. Apparently, the homing projectile did not even manage to lock on its target at all. The movement speed the Shadow Mist Assassin had demonstrated only made these two MMO experts look bad. The Shadow Mist Assassin ignored these two as it went straight for Gufei. In the end, The only ones able to do anything were Sword Demon, who had a good grasp of how fast it moved, and Eternal Dominion, whose skill was second only to Goofy out of everybody present. The two came from the left and right, looking to execute a pincer maneuver to intercept the boss. Sword Demon activated his fleet foot and his movement speed became much faster than Eternal Dominion's, yet he still blocked nothing. Meanwhile, Eternal Dominion directly unleashed his spurring meteor as he dove in from the side. While his speed was nowhere near Sword Demon's, the fighter managed to land a hit right onto the Shadow Mist Assassin's head. Sword Demon, who was even faster than the Shadow Mist Assassin, tried to be in position before the boss could do so but failed. Meanwhile, what Eternal Dominion had done was a preemptive assessment, instantly determining the difference in movement speed between him and the boss. He then dove straight to the point of intersection and accurately landed a punch right onto the Shadow Mist Assassin. Eternal Dominion's attack was different from Goofy. Goofy was a mage, so his strength was weak, and he depended on his spell to deal damage. However, Eternal Dominion's attacks were purely physical. As he already had strength, the attacks and the damage he dealt to the Shadow Mist Assassin would have a tangible effect to it. This one punch he had sent toward the Shadow Mist Assassin easily caused the boss to reel from the blow. Sword Demon seized this opportunity on his end and immediately dashed toward the back of the Shadow Mist Assassin and plunged his dagger to perform a backstab while his fleet foot was still in effect. Royal God Call had also capitalized on the staggering motion of the boss to send a snipe right to its back. At the end of the day, everybody present was experts in their fields. Nobody would miss such an obvious opportunity when it presented itself. Even War Without Wounds stomped over in an attempt to use his charge, but he was just a tad bit too far from the boss and was not faster than that snipe from Royal God Call. In the time it took for him to take 2 steps forward, the Shadow Mist Assassin had fled and dashed back into the safety of the fog again. This was the patented fighting style of the Shadow Mist Assassin, something that those people who had seen it would be used to by now. These men were feeling rather confident now that they had mounted a successful retaliation against the Shadow Mist Assassin this round. If everyone saw this boss dash out but were unable to score a hit, then there would be no point for them to have any further designs on it. At the same time, Sword Demon and the other MMO experts were all thinking, we wouldn't stand a fighting chance against this boss if we didn't have people like Goofy or Eternal Dominion taking on the Shadow Mist Assassin. Be careful, everyone. Goofy, who was recovering after receiving young Master Han's heal, stood up from the ground and began eating fruit. Everybody quickly converged to the center, forming a formation that was similar to what Southern Lone Blade Squad had done before. The difference was that it was Goofy, still eating his fruit, that was right in the middle of everyone. He had the Shadow Mist Assassin's aggro at the moment, so everybody wanted to see what the boss would do now that they were all surrounding Goofy to protect him. Hey, then what do I do? This time, it was Limp Hand standing all alone at the site who hurriedly asked this question. I've already told you to hurry back to the city, young Master Han replied without even turning his head to look at the player. Chapter 442, An Even Distribution of Force. The circle of them nervously watched for changes in the surroundings. The air itself seemed to permeate that sense of power that came from a super powerful boss. Nobody spoke a word, as everything became silent all around them, except for a sound. It was the sound of munching. Everybody could not help but turn back and stare with disdain at Goofy, safely standing in the center of their formation as he earnestly ate his apple. It's just an apple, can't you be a little quieter? Young Master Han expressed his derision. I'm not being loud, it's that everything around us is too quiet, Goofy replied. It was a fully simulated game, after all, so the apples that were created would be the tastiest, crispiest, and sweetest. It was simply impossible to bite at it without producing any sound. At the moment, it was truly too quiet, so even the sound of Goofy swallowing the apple could be heard clearly. Everybody could not hold themselves back any longer. Royal God Call was the first to break, fishing out an apple. He loudly crunched down on it. Next was War Without Wounds, who somehow sounded even louder consuming his apple than the other two men. Nobody knew if the reason behind this was that the warriors had more strength than the two. Young Master Han fished out a bottle of liquor, while Sword Demon maintained his stoic demeanor and soundlessly bit onto a piece of bread. Hey, what the heck are you all doing? Brother Assist was flustered. The enemy was upon them, Yet these guys were not looking in the least bit serious. Finally, his eyes landed on Eternal Dominion, who was standing right next to him. At least, he was not eating anything, which Brother Assist found to be a little reassured in the least. However, in just 2 seconds, even Eternal Dominion pulled out a stick of barbecued fish from his dimensional pocket. Gufei had recommended it to him after they got off the ferry at Linshui City, and he had only gotten a chance to purchase it before he left. Had it not been for him buying these 2 sticks of fish, he would not have been short of money for his trip over to Xiaoyu City. He was a little slower than the others to take it out purely because he was not as practiced as them when it came to picking out the items from his dimensional pocket. Brother Assist envied Gufei. He too wished he could stand in the middle of this circle, for that would surely be the safest position. However, 5 seconds after Brother Assist had this thought, he rejoiced that he was not the one that was in the circle. Royal God Call suddenly exclaimed, and everybody, except Eternal Dominion, immediately threw what they were holding in the direction where he had been looking at. He had stowed that fish away back into his pocket, but his hand was still inside for the longest time. Here it comes. Brother Assist anxiously alerted him. Almost there. I haven't located the slot where I placed my food, Eternal Dominion said. With the enemy upon them, everybody gave him a side eye. This man had actually partitioned his inventory? What a character! The Shadow Mist Assassin had already lunged out from the fog and appeared before everyone. However, not one of them took the initiative to attack it first. Each of them had already made the decision to observe what the boss would do when the target of its aggro was being surrounded like this. They wondered if this was an exploitable flaw or perhaps a loophole the system had left. They quickly got their answer. The Shadow Mist Assassin rushed up to the cluster of players till he was about 5 meters away and abruptly leapt vertically until it was above head level. What followed next was a very clear pause while it was still in midair, and with its head down and feet pointed to the sky, inverted in the air, the boss thrusted its dagger out with both hands. Fuck! Quickly dodge! It was unknown who yelled this, but the originally cluster of players sticking around Gufei all dispersed from their position. Almost at the same time, the Shadow Mist Assassin came plummeting down from the air at a speed much faster than the speed it displayed leaping up. However, just the time the boss took to leap in the sky had allowed Gufei to sufficiently prepare himself for the attack. This was the rhythm issue Gufei had always disdained when it came to how these NPCs acted. While the game designer had probably thought that a sudden pause and sudden rush looked very rhythmic and cool, making anyone watching this sequence of actions feel moved and be in awe, it was not the case for a martial arts expert like Gufei. The Shadow Mist Assassin's uniqueness lay in its extreme speed, so no one would be able to beat it if it had a quick tempo to boot. However, this ended up becoming the key exploitable flaw of the boss despite its adroitness. It was entirely unclear if this was the designer being blind to this fact or if it was a flaw that was intentionally left for players to utilize. In any case, now that the Shadow Mist Assassin was already plummeting at such high speed, and the others that had originally been protecting Gufei all dispersed, Gufei was once again left to face the Shadow Mist Assassin alone, as the rest searched for any possible opportunity to attack like before. Gufei shoved his sword forward with both hands and used the same method as before to block the Shadow Mist Assassin's attack. Unexpectedly, its attack this time was stronger than any of its previous attacks. Gufei was originally thinking that if pushed upward while taking the attack from below, he could at least prevent himself from flying off, since he had his feet planted to the ground for support. He did not expect the momentum of the attack this time to be so immense that he actually had difficulty even holding on. His arms bended to the force from the dagger, even his sword and hilt involuntarily moving toward his head. Gufei quickly bent his legs and leaned back, intending to collapse onto the ground to increase the area of contact. This way, he could distribute the force more evenly and relieve some of the pressure in hopes of resisting this diving kill move from the Shadow Mist Assassin. Sure enough, Gufei was able to hold this attack after collapsing onto the ground as he did, but it was an unpleasant ordeal. Right now, the force of the attack was being exerted across his entire body, making him feel as if he were about to cramp. Gufei's lips were trembling uncontrollably, and the apple that was originally jammed in his mouth fell off instantly. In the end, this fallen apple acted like a signal, and the rest of the players that had scattered suddenly activated their attacks in concert. Swords, daggers, and fists all uniformly smashed onto the Shadow Mist assassin. Everybody saw red, and it was literally the red from spilled blood, which turned into a hanging mist. What was really astonishing was that this blood mist had actually come from Gu Fei's body. The Shadow Mist assassin did not even land on the ground as it once more dodged past over the heads of everybody and flew right back into the fog. These men did not pay attention to the boss any longer as they turned to regard the sprawled Gu Fei by their feet. Blood that looked as if he had been pricked by a needle all over stained his face. Young Master Han tossed a heel his way and asked, "You all right?" "I'm fine," Gu Fei clambered up his feet and replied. Everybody was surprised. The man looked frighteningly injured yet seemed very alright. Young Master Han saw the blood splatter on his face and commented, "Seeing as how you were able to spit out blood like that, you probably managed to distribute the force rather evenly." This plummeting aerial assault from the Shadow Mist assassin was truly too powerful, so much so that even though Gu Fei had tried to block it as best as he could, the force of the attack alone was already capable of dealing a near fatal damage to him as the force exerted from the attack steadily lowered his HP the entire time. Had it not been for young Master Han's timely heal, he might have truly lost his life there and then. While the attack did not directly make contact with his body, the pressure itself from the attack was distributed throughout his frame, creating this peculiar scene where blood began to force its way out from his whole body so explosively. Even now, no one was convinced that Gu Fei was fine after taking such a blow. "I'm really okay," Gu Fei maintained even as he wiped away a trickle of blood from a corner of his mouth. "Wow, you're still insisting you're fine even though blood is already coming out of your mouth," everyone exclaimed. "We're in a MMO. This is but a sign for the game to show that I am losing HP. There's no need to make such a big fuss about it," Gu Fei said. "Fuck. When is it your turn to lecture us about this?" The experts were now all mocking this first-time gamer. "However, I think that method of luring the enemy we just did is no good," Gu Fei said. He might look fine on the outside, but that attack had truly been an agonizing experience for him. He was too embarrassed to express it to this lot, though. The damage from this attack occurred all over his body, and while the lack of any wound meant it did not hurt, adding the fact that the simulation worked to dull the most extreme sensations, Gu Fei ended up feeling itchy all over instead of pain. It felt as if microscopic worms were trying to crawl out of his body from his every pore, with his blood attempting to force its way out. Gu Fei only managed not to scratch himself all over and bear with it thanks to his superior endurance. This was because he knew that as long as he recovered his HP, the symptom he was feeling was bound to end, so he endured it all and continued to exchange words with everyone in a calm manner. Still, he had no intention of experiencing all that again, which was precisely why he was insisting on them to avoid recreating the scenario, which had caused the Shadow Mist assassin to do that plummeting aerial assault. Spread out, don't surround me like that," Gu Fei shooed everybody away. "So, we'll just continue using you to draw the boss out whenever he attacks, and we'll just use that chance to attack from the sidelines," young Master Han said. This was the plan that they had come up with from the start. "Will that really work?" Royal God Call asked. "Try it for a few rounds and I can more or less affirm my conjecture," young Master Han replied. "What?" All young Master Han did was nod his head to brother assist and not say another word. "It's back!" Sword Demon yelled out before Royal God Call could even continue to ask. While everybody did not gather and covered a uniform 360 degrees, they were still able to cover most, if not all, of their surroundings just by randomly standing around as they were now. It was Sword Demon, whose back was facing Gu Fei, who spotted the Shadow Mist assassin reveal itself from the fog this time. Its target was again the man whose back was facing the boss, Gu Fei. "It's always the same, how frustrating." Gu Fei had completely familiarized himself with how the Shadow Mist assassin attacked and its patterns by now. It was apparent that the system was unable to automatically come up with any new technique or approach, either. All the boss did was execute the few moves it had been programmed to do, which Gu Fei had already committed to heart. Placing his sword horizontally across his chest to block, the dagger and sword clashed. The body of the Shadow Mist assassin would always pause slightly when the clash occurred, which was also the moment that all the others had been waiting for to strike. None of them cared if they would hit the target as they each unleashed their attacks without further ado. In the end, This pause that the Shadow Mist assassin had done was truly too brief. Gufei was already sent flying off into the fog after taking this attack, and the Shadow Mist assassin immediately chased after him accordingly. Everybody's attack missed, and this included Eternal Dominion's punch. He had been too far away from the boss's position this time, so he did not manage to close the gap. Royal Godcall's homing projectile managed to find its way to the Shadow Mist assassin, but he was soon disappointed by a discovery. The speed of the homing projectile was not as fast as the boss. In a situation where Gufei and the Shadow Mist assassin were fighting one-on-one, the positioning of either party would quickly move the moment the clash occurred. Everyone hurried over in the direction where the two had disappeared to, but the Shadow Mist assassin was already gone by then. All that was left was Gufei getting himself up from the ground once more, smiling to the others as he said, "It won't end up like this all the time." There were plenty of attack patterns that the Shadow Mist assassin could employ, and there were some that they simply stood no chance of capitalizing on. Take the attack pattern from before, there were still quite a few times that would present a viable opportunity to exploit, and that was precisely what everybody was waiting for. Yeah. Everybody nodded. The harder it was to deal with a boss, the more likely that it was a high-value target, so they were all patiently waiting for that chance to occur. At the same time, the scrupulous gaming employee Yi Xiao, who was lounging about with nothing to do, strolled over to the monitoring department. He was greeted with a scene where a bunch of people was crowding around a screen, with someone welcoming him the moment he got in. "Chief Yi, quickly come and take a look. There are some players attempting to kill a level 60 boss." "Level 60 boss? Which one?" Yi Xiao perked up when he heard this. "The Shadow Mist assassin." "Whoa! How many of them are fighting it? How many died?" Yi Xiao hurriedly came over and grabbed a seat. "It's been a while, but it seems that not one of them is dead yet," a colleague from the monitoring team replied. "How is that possible?" Yi Xiao was in shock. Chapter 443, Assassin Sancroid level 60 was already the highest level that a wild boss could reach. Bosses that were even stronger than this level could only be encountered during quests or could only appear as a result of plot-related interactions. It was rumored that this sort of bosses were far cleverer, stronger, and more likely to have better loot. However, their whereabouts were like legends that would require players to meet certain criteria just to meet them, so it was far more infrequent to bump into them than wild bosses. Wild bosses in Parallel World had been specifically programmed to be mobile. This was done to prevent situations like players forming a team daily to do boss grinding in a set spot from cropping up. This also meant that bosses from all the various levels were unlike the usual monsters that would remain in their respective grinding maps and could, instead, be found roaming about. As a result, there were players who questioned just what the low-level players should do if this sort of high-level bosses ended up wandering into a lower-level grinding map. The response from the game officials was like in heartless derision. What else can players do but avoid it as best as they can? After all, it will always be roaming, so it will definitely leave after a short while. There was even a legend in the game, during the open beta days, when the levels of players were still rather low, a roaming high-level boss actually ended up wandering somewhere near one of the city gates. Countless players had no idea what to make of it and died by its hands. They realized what was going on thereafter, and each of them tried to escape, but the boss actually ambled right toward the city. But just as the players panicked and thought that a massacre was about to unfold, two very nondescript NPC guards by the gate were mobilized and easily wiped out this boss in 2 or 3 hits. Players learned 2 things from this anecdote. The first was that the NPC guards were very strong. A conservative estimate would be that these guards were at the same tier as a boss, thus, nobody dared to offend them afterward. The second was that a boss killed by NPC guards would still drop loot, and it was a rather amazing drop to boot. It attracted plenty of players around to snatch it for themselves. No one had any idea who was the person that ended up with a dropped item, but any peak expert that appeared from that city in question ended up being suspected by the entire city. After that, there were always players that would have ill designs for it. Assassinating and backstabbing, the subsequent bloodshed from the countless PvP and park activities ended up cultivating a violent impulse and domineering custom among the city's denizens. The name of the city that was at the center of this legend was called Y. It was only when some unknown brat formed a group and quickly developed it into the strongest guild in Y City, before proceeding to bully all the players until they did not dare to speak or even rage against them. That was when everybody realized that this person, who had been hiding and had never shown the depths of his strength before suddenly making a break for dominance over the entire city, was the real lucky recipient of the loot from that incident between the guards and the boss. The name of this man who hit the jackpot was none other than Silver Moon. Just a high-level boss accidentally wandering into a city gate had caused so much complications for an entire city. The jury was still out on whether the introduction of this roaming feature was a boon or a bane. Nevertheless, there were no other incidents where high-level bosses wandered into a city gate, and the officials subsequently accepted the player's suggestion to limit the boss's movement, such that they would not move too frequently and would occasionally stopping so it would at least be able to spend time to linger about. Afterward, players would often praise the bosses in this game as lone wolves, forever wandering the endless expanse of the grinding maps in this VR world. The bosses in Parallel World were elusive to players, but the Shadow Mist Assassin was an exception. This was because its backstory was someone who had lost its way. The most common phenomenon for someone who had lost their way was to find their way back to where they had come from no matter how much time had passed or how long they had walked. And this was exactly what the Shadow Mist Assassin was doing. Even though it was not so bad as if it was walking in circles in one spot, its speed of advancement was very slow at the very least. Thus, after limp hands located it, they were still able to come back to the same spot and bump into this wild boss. "Hey, make way, let me take a look." Quite a lot of employees were watching these players take on the boss, so Yixiao had to jostle and squeeze his way to the front. The fog around the city was not present on their monitoring screen, and they were able to zoom in and out the scene at will. At the moment, the display was zoomed out so as to take in the entire spectacle. Yixiao could clearly make out the Shadow Mist Assassin sneaking around in the fog, while the players not too far away were on full alert. "Who's got the aggro?" Yixiao asked this question. As a game designer, he knew the most unique characteristic of the Shadow Mist Assassin. Aside from being a lost soul, the other unique characteristic it had was how it handled threat. The range of its aggro was huge, but what was more important was the fact that the aggro formula would stop calculating threat after it locked onto the first player it caught sight of. This meant that until the target it had set eyes on was killed, the Shadow Mist Assassin's aggro would not change. This also meant that there was no way in which this aggro could be reset or be removed. "So, there's no way to remove its aggro?" The colleagues from the monitoring team were also aware of the Shadow Mist Assassin's unique characteristic, so they immediately posited this question to confirm this fact when they saw the senior designer Yixiao. "There are two ways, kill the Shadow Mist Assassin or log out," Yixiao answered. Everybody was quiet. Those options were no different from saying that there was no way to remove the aggro. They had intentionally formulated such a unique aggro coding precisely to counter the current MMO style of pulling bosses and monsters with meat shields while the damage dealers safely dumped their damage. "You wish to draw the boss's aggro? Fine, we shall save you the trouble by setting our Shadow Mist Assassin to do the targeting for you. There's no way for you to change it even if you want to. Anyway, you wish to concentrate all the threat onto your best tanker? Once said player can no longer hold on, our Shadow Mist Assassin will decide on its own its next target and attack accordingly. Any skill that was able to generate threat will be rendered useless by it." This was an extremely contemptible design, and this was why Yixiao and his fellow designers had dubbed this aggro formula, which was unique to the Shadow Mist Assassin, as Assassin's Sancfroid. How should players deal with this sort of design? Even the designers themselves had not thought of it. Giving this sort of problem for the players to solve seemed to be where these people find the joy in their work. This was what made Yixiao feel extremely excited the moment he heard that some people were attempting to take on the Shadow Mist Assassin. However, He was beyond astonished once he learned that none had died despite this going on for quite a while. That was when somebody pointed toward the monitor and indicated the player who was holding the boss's aggro. "That's the guy." The display on the monitor was reduced in size, so Yixiao could only make the person out to be a mage decked in black robe. The person's face may be blurry, but a thought crossed his mind for a fleeting moment: could it be that guy? Yixiao zoomed in as he thought of this to himself. Oi, oi, oi. Everybody was dissatisfied. They should be looking at the full picture when watching such boss battles. There was no point zooming in just to check a particular character. Yixiao could already identify the man without having to go in too close, though. "It's him, alright." Yixiao almost felt like crying. "That mage is so skilled, he's capable of blocking the boss's attack every time," one of his colleagues from the monitoring team commented. This person was evidently someone who had just been transferred recently, since he was unaware of the story behind Yixiao and this mage. This was a story where plenty of the members from the monitoring team were aware of. This was the mage that had agitated the game designer, Yixiao, many times. "It's attacking!" that new colleague suddenly exclaimed. The shadow mist assassin on the screen that had been circling outside those players' field of vision abruptly dashed toward the group. Everybody was well aware that its target was the mage, so they were all looking forward to seeing how the player would resolve this attack. In the end, nothing much was needed to be said on how it had gone down, though that new colleague still appeared to be very excited. "Haha, look!" He blocked it yet again. The gathered crowd was silent, with some even sneaking glances at Yixiao's current expression. Someone even wished that this was happening in game, so he could quickly fire off a private message to this new colleague of theirs to stop acting like such a huge fan of the mage and consider the feelings of their fellow colleague Yixiao, instead. Still, blocking the attacks all this while, it seems that this guy has run out of moves. "There's nothing refreshing about it anymore," this new colleague quipped. He had been watching this battle with the Shadow Mist Assassin from the very start and had been instantly drawn by Goofei's endless methods of dealing with the boss, always looking forward to see a fresh new move from him, but it had been a long time since the man showed anything new in how he faced these attacks. "I don't think that man has run out of moves. Rather, it is the boss that keeps using the same few attack patterns, so he naturally will use the same few methods to deal with it accordingly," another colleague remarked. He was clearly also a newcomer, as he did not even know who Yixiao was and even greeted the stranger who had squeezed his way to the front row. "Don't you agree? By the way, my name's XXXX. I just arrived here 3 days ago. Why haven't I seen you before?" All the other colleagues quietly thought of the famous line from the Fist of the North Star: "You were already dead, Ome wa mushin diiruan." Sure enough, Yixiao quickly sported an unhappy expression. The leader of the monitoring team hurriedly made arrangements. "Ziliu, head over there and help open a computer for Chief Yi. Save this footage so that he can closely observe how these people take on the boss while underleveled. This way, he can better improve on his design." This was the excuse that Yixiao often gave for his frequent visits to the monitoring team. Yixiao headed over to the seat by himself even as he heard that new guy asked behind him, "Chief Yi? Which Chief Yi?" Dash 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 dash. Back in the game, the Shadow Mist Assassin just completed another assault, and only Eternal Dominion managed to accurately strike the boss this time around. However, now that Sword Demon and the others had more experience directly fighting with boss, they too were starting to become accustomed to it and were improving quite a lot. However, more importantly, young Master Han and Brother Assist were muttering between themselves at the side, nodding their heads incessantly. Goofei did not receive any damage from this round of exchange, but young Master Han still bestowed heal on him, even going as far as to toss one heal each to everybody present, which really left them confused as to what he was doing. This was when young Master Han explained himself. "It seems that I've guessed correctly, there's no way to draw the aggro from this boss." "What do you mean?" "Miles has only attacked this boss once. Logically speaking, even though they've been entangling for so long, the threat he could generate from the boss shouldn't be too high. Meanwhile, I've been using heal plenty of times in front of the boss, so if it's like any other normal bosses, it would have transferred its aggro to me by now. That's why I believe that this boss is following a unique aggro formula, such that it will only target one player, and in this case, it is Miles. Young Master Han explained at length. Is there such a thing? Is it possible that the threat you generate from healing isn't enough? War Without Wounds asked. Take a look for yourself. This time, it was Brother Assist who spoke. Raising his booklet, he pointed to what was written in it. A priest's heal generates about this much threat each application, and young master has already healed this number of times. I've taken note of the approximate distance between him and the boss each time, so using this formula right here, the amount of threat he has generated thus far should be around this much, while Miles, on the other hand. Do you guys understand? During the process of Brother Assist's explanation, the Shadow Mist Assassin had visited them twice. So, if we were to include those 2 times as well, alright. War Without Wounds extended his hand out to stop him from continuing. We don't get it, but we believe you. Anyway, I'll beat you up if you explain this to us again. And I'll help. Royal God Call added. Chapter 444, Modification Tool. After uncovering the unique characteristic of the Shadow Mist Assassin, these veterans no longer needed further instructions since they already know how they should be fighting. Essentially, it was still the same method as before, using a meat shield to hold the aggro, while everybody else dealt as much damage as they could. The only difference was that the main player who would be holding the aggro was not a meat shield but someone in possession of skills that far outstripped an actual tank. The experts all surrounded the Shadow Mist Assassin even as tears rolled down their cheeks. Now that Gufei was even able to tank, was there really anything this man could not do? Gufei's indomitable invincibility when it came to PvP was usually largely due to his dependency on his 2 over-leveled equipment. Everybody in Young Master's Elite was aware of this, with some even thinking at times that they might not fare any worse than Gufei if they were the ones who had come in possession of such ridiculously overpowered equipment. In fact, they believed that there might even be times when they could perform better. However, drawing aggro was a role that only tank meat shields could do. There was no way they would be able to do such a task if they had not picked the relevant job classes. No matter how much of an expert Sword Demon really was, drawing the aggro with a thief character was simply not something he could accomplish. Yet, Gufei was able to do this as a mage. Everyone was still feeling dejected when they saw young Master Han adopt the air of a boss as he pompously pointed at Gufei. Not bad. You're finally able to coordinate with us, so at least you're not completely useless in this group. Everybody stared incredulously at young Master Han, thinking to themselves just how he was able to say something so shameless. It seemed that he, too, was a man without any limits. Gufei was not listening in the slightest. He was focusing every fiber of his being on dealing with the Shadow Mist Assassin's attacks, so why would he bother with such things? Even though this whole bunch of people had come to assist him, the situation he was in had not changed in the least. He was still the only one capable of directly handling the boss, and in order to give everybody the chance to attack it, he was no longer able to contend with the boss in front of him as cleanly as before. From time to time, he would have to reduce his tempo and exchange a few blows with the boss. The risk he was taking increased as a result, with the difficulty mounting to match. He was already having a hard time concentrating as it stood, so why would he bother paying attention to the nonsense these people were spouting right now? Yi Xiaoyu was staring intensely at the computer's monitor as his right hand gripped the mouse tightly. His left hand was already balled up into a fist, clenching even further when he saw the Shadow Mist Assassin's attack. His mouth unconsciously mumbled, "Go, go, go. Kill him, kill him." Yi Xiaoyu was rooting for the Shadow Mist Assassin, but every assault left him feeling disappointed. Every attack pattern and routine that they had programmed the assassin with were all easily seen through by Gufei, who became all the more skillful at dealing with every move the boss made. Meanwhile, Yi Xiaoyu found himself more and more confused at the actions of the rest of the players in that party. These people seemed to be attacking the boss with every opportunity they had and were not in the least bit concerned with coordination or anything else. This was definitely not how the average gamer would act when taking on a boss. Generally speaking, Gufei was no doubt the most indomitable and cavalier damage dealer in the game as of date, and these other players should, therefore, be trying to draw the aggro from the boss away from him to some else. Yet given the way that they were attacking the boss without any care for composition or teamwork, It seemed that they were not even trying to do anything explicit. Unless Yi Xiao watched a few more rounds before finally coming to a realization. No coordination? The mage was the one in charge of maintaining aggro, while the others were dealing damage. That was their teamwork. Furthermore, looking at how they unleashed all their skills and moves without holding back, a huge taboo when taking on a boss, as it would easily disrupt aggro and threat buildup. They had most likely already come to a conclusion about the Shadow Mist Assassin's aggro formula and were now aware that no matter what they did, the boss would not change target. This was the only possible explanation as to why they were attacking the boss so relentlessly. It was not such a big deal that they had seen through the gimmick, but what was too much was still the mage. He was merely at level 41. Yet he was more than capable of resisting the Shadow Mist Assassin's attack all by himself. It was such a flagrant disregard of the rules of a game, which left Yi Xiao feeling very depressed. The monitoring team could easily check on the various metrics and data of the game, and the scene Yi Xiao was currently viewing depicted the HP of the boss, which was already down to its final third. The Shadow Mist Assassin was a boss with low HP. Yi Xiao and his fellow game designers would surely be condemned had they designed it to have plenty of HP along with that impossible to match movement speed, so they did not dare go too overboard. Still, Yi Xiao was feeling entirely discontented when he saw how this carefully crafted boss of his was easily being beaten by these players. Had they been a group of average gamers, Yi Xiao would have praised them endlessly, but it just so happened that he had spotted Gu Fei among them. In his eyes, Gu Fei's existence was entirely a bug, and the ironclad rule for a programmer like him would be that bugs found must be removed. Letting this bug remain in the game would only serve to create even greater problems. It was already a huge bug that this man was capable of completing a high-level chain quest when he was just at level 30, and now that same person was about to create an even bigger bug, as the equipment dropped by a level 60 boss would naturally be around the same level. Such a top-grade equipment like that would mean he could acquire another Moonlit Nightfalls or Midnight Spirit robe. Yi Xiao's heart was in a knot right now. Gu Fei might be a bug, but he was also just a common player. He had not exploited any in-game loophole or rule. While Yi Xiao truly intended to deal with this bug, there was no way he could deprive him of his rights as a player to play the game. Yi Xiao involuntarily glanced at the remaining HP of the Shadow Mist Assassin. Another few rounds had passed, and its HP took a hit yet again. Besides the mage, none of the other players looked to be weak, and they were becoming more and more familiar with how to fight the Shadow Mist Assassin. As long as the mage did not make a mistake, it would only be a matter of time before they finished off this boss. Not like this. Yi Xiao abruptly came to a decision. If he was unable to eliminate this bug, then it should at least be fine if he prevented the bug from worsening, right? Thinking of this, Yi Xiao, who had been anxious all this while, finally calmed down. Now that the Shadow Mist Assassin's HP is down 2/3, what can I do with the remaining 1/3? Yi Xiao took note of everything he could utilize right now: the computer in the monitoring room, the data available, and the permissions. Even though the word monitor was in the name of the team, a good portion of the job was actually done by the computer when it came to doing the actual monitoring. It ensured that the data being processed was untampered, and that any anomaly would get automatically reported. Besides this, the other part of their job was collating the feedback from the players from within the game to ensure that nothing inappropriate would happen and that the game would run smoothly. This was usually handled by the GMs that were online. As for the workers that were really seated in the monitoring room, they were actually the emergency response team in the case that an event of heavy magnitude took place. This setup would enable them to resolve problems in the quickest manner once any issue occurred. Take for example the incident that had happened over in Y City. The moment the monitoring team received words about what was happening, they immediately adjusted the stats of the city guards and sicked them on the boss. This had to be done, for even if they were of boss levels themselves, the sort of crazy damage output they needed to be able to defeat the boss in 2 or 3 moves was simply too mind-blowing. This sort of monstrous attack power would mean that the guards would be able to insta-kill any player, which would make them an existence far beyond the average bosses. It was just that the monitoring team had only just began their work and did not have much experience. They had not handled this situation perfectly, and their intervention resulted into the boss dropping loot. A perfect way of handling this matter would be to lower the rate of the boss's loot drops before killing it. Only by reducing its drop rate would it work out as if nothing had happened. After that, the monitoring team reported the problem to the operations and planning department, which Yizia-U belonged to, and got them to completely correct the issue and patch the game accordingly at the next maintenance. The reason bosses no longer wandered near the cities after this instance was that Yizia-U and his team had made the necessary corrections. Furthermore, the monitoring team here worked like a standalone game modification tool. All the data in the game were contained within the servers, which were naturally in the control of the game company. To them, this MMO was like a standalone game, so it was a given that they would have a tool to enable them to make instant modification. Of course, this tool was limited to the discretionary use of the monitoring tool in the event of an anomaly, and other departments did not have the permission to fiddle with it. Yixiao was aware that every computer that the monitoring team used would have installed this modification program, and he was not entirely unfamiliar with it as he was the one who had created the program in the first place. Yixiao took a peek at his colleagues from the monitoring team and saw that they were all still enjoying the boss's fight like before, while those who were not watching the screen were busy with their tasks. Nobody had their eye on him. Turning his attention back to his computer, he was uncertain when his hand had unconsciously moved the mouse over to the modification program. Gritting his teeth, he decisively double-clicked it. The modification program was whitelisted for the monitoring team, so nothing would be reported no matter what kind of modification was made. However, there was no way to save the changes made using the tool, so even if the modification was successfully applied, the changes would revert the moment the program closed. Of course, Yixiao did not dare to keep the tool open the entire time right now. He would be finished if any random colleague glanced over at his monitor. No matter the circumstance, utilizing the modification tool for personal use was a serious violation and could result in him getting sacked, not to mention that he was not an actual member of the monitoring team. However, Yixiao had long since thought of what he wanted to do. Starting up the modification program, a window prompt asking for access permission appeared. Yixiao had no permission, but this was not a problem to him. After all, he was the one who had created the entire program. Opening another WordPad, Yixiao pretended to calmly type into the keyboard, writing up code for a program in no time. He saved it and executed it, bypassing the permission window entirely. Entering the modification program, Yixiao quickly carried out an operation, modifying the conditions for the boss to become enraged. Every boss had an enrage mechanic. The condition to trigger it varied, with some activating once their HP reached a certain point or they took a certain amount of damage. There were even some that would enrage whenever they felt like it. The harder it was to trigger these conditions in the bosses, the more powerful the mechanic would be. The condition for the Shadow Mist Assassin to enrage was considerably complex, and Yixiao was positive that there was no way they could trigger it seeing the way Gu Fei and the others were fighting it. Thus, Yixiao decided to lend a hand, temporarily changing the condition for the boss to enrage from that complex condition to upon being attacked. Confirming the change, the most nerve-wracking moment was while the change was in the midst of application. He was unable to shut down the program while this happened. Yixiao averted his gaze from the monitor as he stared at the people around him, when he suddenly heard the spectators of the fight exclaim, "Ah, the boss is enraged." Yixiao quickly turned back and swiftly exited the program. This was the magnificence of his plan. The program might have been closed and everything was back to normal, but the fact that the boss was now enraged was considered as an after effect of the modified condition. Therefore, it would not revert to normal just because the modification was removed. At the moment, the Shadow Mist Assassin was already in the process of enraging. Chapter 445, The Enraged Shadow Mist Assassin. There shouldn't be any issues triggering the enrage mechanics, right? Yixiao was still a little worried as he pondered over this. This was the solution he had come up with in a hurry. He originally wanted to modify the drop rate of the boss the moment before the Shadow Mist Assassin's HP depleted, but he was worried that somebody would coincidentally be standing behind him. Opportunity waited for no man. Yixiao had to seize this opportunity when nobody was looking to act, yet he did not dare to open the program for too long. Thus, His final option was to modify the condition to enrage the boss. Nobody should be able to notice what I just did. Yi Xiao was rather confident of this. The members of the monitoring team were only problem solvers when someone sent a report of an issue to them. They were unfamiliar with the data metrics of the game. All they saw was the enrage mechanic being triggered, which was nothing elaborate, so it should not draw anyone's suspicions. Yi Xiao thought about this even as he continued to sneak glances at those people watching the battle. The boss was in an enraged state, but not one of them appeared to be suspicious and was, instead, all the more excited now, as if they were all injected with stimulants. Even those people who were originally not too interested in the attempt could not help but head over and look. Yi Xiao felt as if he was a director that had just successfully created the climax for this show. These men from the monitoring were aware that the boss was enraged, but Gu Fei and the others in-game had no clue. The enraged Shadow Mist Assassin had just been activated after that last wave of attack, and its style of combat was not in the least bit altered after being enraged. As per usual, the Shadow Mist Assassin continued to hide itself back in the fog after its attack. In order for the players to know that a boss was enraged and make the necessary preparations, it would usually undergo a process of change. At the moment, the Shadow Mist Assassin was already visibly changing, its skin turning red, eyes becoming bloodshot, and its hair standing up on its ends. But due to the environment inside the city, as well as the unique characteristic of the Shadow Mist Assassin, Gu Fei and the others were still in the dark about this. When the Shadow Mist Assassin next appeared, it was still targeting Gu Fei's back. The first one to spot it this time was Brother Assist, and he quickly alerted the others of the incoming figure in the fog. Gu Fei calmly turned around but, instead, discovered that the boss was already before him. He was not the only one taken aback by this. Everybody else had also received quite the fright when they saw the speed at which the boss had suddenly appeared. However, they were not directly threatened in the least and were still able to make adjustment. Accordingly, Gu Fei, who was due to be taking the boss's attack, turned to face the boss that now had bloodshot eyes and seemed to be about to spew fire. Shocked, Gu Fei figured that it would be too late for him to block with his sword like before, so all he could do was to extend his left hand to stop it. He was very precise, and this extension of his hand latched onto the wrist of the Shadow Mist Assassin, but how was that enough to stop its ensuing impact? Upon impact, Gu Fei was sent spiraling up the sky like a kite. Meanwhile, the Shadow Mist Assassin skidded smoothly and did an about turn. Propping itself on the ground with one hand and gripping its dagger in reverse with another, it looked as if it were about to leap, just like a predator pouncing on its prey. The skin, eyes, and hair. These changes were too obvious, and anyone could tell from a glance. Adding up the increased speed and the force of impact, these experienced MMO experts all exclaimed, "Enrage!" The enrage mechanic was a common sight in MMOs and was not particularly worth making a fuss about, but the issue is that the Shadow Mist Assassin before them was already difficult to deal with previously. Now that its enrage was triggered, the situation had once more turned grim. Gu Fei took a tumble in the air and landed heavily on the ground. Given his skill, he would always be able to make some adjustment while in midair whenever he lost his balance. Even if he had no choice but to collapse to the ground, he would always make sure to leave himself in a position that allowed him to recover in the fastest time. However, at this moment, Gu Fei had actually fallen flat on the ground and was unable to immediately get himself on his feet. This was entirely due to the fact that he had sustained a heavy injury from that last attack, so much so that the system somewhat restricted his movement. This attack had dealt a shocking amount of damage that Gu Fei was left with but a sliver of HP. Any normal mage would have died from this, but thanks to his Windchaser's blessing, as well as that hand of his that somewhat reduced the force behind the attack, he prevented himself from being insta-killed. Nevertheless, the heavy injury he took was unavoidable, and at the moment, he lay sprawled on the ground, his mind awake yet his body was unable to move. "What's wrong with Miles?" someone asked aloud. Young Master Han sarcastically replied, "Can't you tell just by looking at him now?" With that, he waved his staff. This time, he did not cast heal. Heal was used to recover HP, while Gu Fei had sustained a heavy injury right now. This was similar to dizzy, weaken, wound, and other such statuses players would sustain. They required a specific skill or medicine to remove, otherwise, No amount of food or heal from a priest would recover any HP. The skill young Master Han was currently using was the level 40 skill, Cure, which light priests would learn upon job class advancement. This skill could be considered as a skill that applied a sustained effect. The staff of young Master Han shone forth a glaring light once he chanted the spell, causing a bright glow to envelope Gu Fei's entire body. He would only fully recover when the glow receded. However, the boss had no intentions of giving Gu Fei the chance to cure himself. Getting into position after making that 180-degree turn, it instantly used the same attack he did to dash toward the fallen Gu Fei. War Without Wounds gave a loud grunt and activated his charge to collide into the Shadow Mist Assassin. These experts might not have the Kung Fu expertise to supplement their skills, but the other aspects of their skill set, like experience and awareness, were still top-notch. Seeing that Gu Fei had been knocked down and needed protection, War Without Wounds was already upon him to block the boss from getting to Gu Fei. When War Without Wounds saw how Gu Fei had survived that boss's attack, he reckoned it would be difficult for him to be insta-killed. Thus, he courageously stood before the boss to bear the brunt of the incoming attack. He was not expecting to knock the boss over with his attack either and was only hoping to buy some time for young Master Han to cure Gu Fei. Everybody knew clearly who was the linchpin that would allow them to successfully slay this boss. The Shadow Mist Assassin might be a boss, but its body was weak. Its muscles and build did not dramatically expand even after it entered a state of enrage, so it was still 2 sizes smaller than the stocky warrior War Without Wounds. The warrior had both his hands gripping the claymore before him as he crossed blades with that slender dagger the Shadow Mist Assassin was holding, and the sound made upon collision was earth-shattering. What the fuck? War Without Wounds had not forgotten to curse even at such a time. That huge body of his was also sent flying up in the air, but he did not spiral in the air like Gu Fei had before. He merely sailed upward and landed on his butt, raising a larger cloud of dirt and dust than Gu Fei, but he did not suffer from a heavy injury. First, warriors had plenty of HP thanks to the job class's high rate of growth toward this particular stat. Second, War Without Wounds was fully clad in heavy armor, so the defense it afforded was far higher than that of a rogue mage. Third, War Without Wounds used his skill charge, and the verdict for this attack was many times higher than Gu Fei's active grabbing the boss's hand. With all these 3 reasons stacked together, even though War Without Wounds was sent flying with that attack, the damage he sustained was not as bad as Gu Fei's and was far from getting a heavy injury. Had Gu Fei been in War Without Wounds' shoes, there was no way to tell if he could have landed on his feet. This one sacrificial charge from War Without Wounds was truly the key in saving Gu Fei. Taking in that impact of the charge head-on, even though the Shadow Mist Assassin's advance was not halted, it at least slowed down the boss from reaching Gu Fei quickly. This slowing down gave Eternal Dominion an opportunity to attack. Locking his arms around the boss's waist, he proceeded to execute a seismic toss onto the Shadow Mist Assassin and tossed it out. The Shadow Mist Assassin had even managed to do a reverse kick right at Eternal Dominion as it was being tossed into the air. Another fighter would have simply taken this hit. According to the rules of the system, any target that had been subjected to a seismic toss would be immobile before it landed on the ground, but who knew that the Shadow Mist Assassin would be unaffected by this and would even be able to retaliate? However, this was Eternal Dominion, after all. As a professional Kung Fu practitioner, he exuded a fighting awareness from head to toe, so there was no way he would be so careless as to let such an attack land. This reverse kick from the Shadow Mist Assassin was instantly blocked by Eternal Dominion with his backhand. He was aware of course that a kick from a boss would not simply be just that, so he even activated the Shockwave Shield on the said hand. The Shockwave Shield was destroyed by that kick from the Shadow Mist Assassin, causing Eternal Dominion to retreat several steps as his HP lowered. However, the Shadow Mist Assassin was unable to entirely shrug off the effect of the seismic toss, so it still went flying out. Still, it was able to adjust itself while midair and landed upright on the ground. The charge in seismic toss at least bought enough time for Gu Fei. The spell efficacy of the self-proclaimed Golden Ratio priest young Master Han was much stronger than the average priests, so Gu Fei was already standing upright from that cure of his. The Shadow Mist Assassin moved once more, as Gu Fei steeled himself for the incoming attack, but who knew that it would actually dash right toward a royal god call. Instead, all their defense was surrounding Gu Fei, Since everybody no longer doubted that the boss, which had kept its eyes on Goofy all this time, would change target. Nobody had truly expected the boss to do something like this at such a crucial moment. Therefore, none of them was able to assist or provide any sort of cover for Royal God Call in time. Furthermore, archers were a ranged job class that possessed the highest agility. Their strength was not too shabby, either, but their low HP, which was not even comparable to mages, was their biggest weakness. While their defense was stronger than that of a mage, that bit of defense was as good as negligible when faced against a level 60 boss. Adding the fact that the job class possessed zero melee ranged skills, Royal God Call only had one option in mind: run, flee, and buy some time for his comrades to rescue him. That was what Royal God Call thought as he turned to flee. Help was, indeed, quickly on its way, as Goofy raised his sword and chanted, and a crackling electric wall appeared right behind Royal God Call just a beat after. However, the Shadow Mist assassin disregarded this spell in its entirety and ran headfirst into that electric wall. Electricity crackled and a human-sized tear appeared on this lightning barricade. The Shadow Mist assassin's entire body was arcing electric current and spark as it continued its way forward, undeterred. In several steps, it caught up to its target and lashed out with its dagger. Royal God Call's choice of turning around to flee became the flaw that caused his death in this moment. Electricity was coursing through the Shadow Mist assassin's entire body, meaning, it was still carrying the paralyzed status that came with lightning spells. The unique effect that came from the paralysis effect was the restriction of skill usage. Had Royal God Call taken that basic attack from the front, he might not have died. However, turning around to flee had only exposed his back to the enemy. An attack from the back by an assassin would deal additional damage. This was the unique characteristic that assassins had. As a boss with the same job class, this particular characteristic was further amplified. Adding the increased attack power from being enraged, Royal God Call was easily insta-killed after taking that one stab. With a loud roar, the Shadow Mist assassin once again shook off the electricity coursing through its body and returned to hide in the fog. A look of confusion could be seen on the remaining 6 players. Over on his side, Yixiao could not help but reveal a devious smile at the moment. The aggro formula was completely reset once the Shadow Mist assassin was enraged. Why would an enraged Shadow Mist assassin still retain Assassin's Sancthroid? Do you take us game designers as fools? Yixiao thought to himself. Chapter 446, Random Attack Formula. Assassin's Sancthroid could be easily dealt with the moment its aggro formula was made known to the players. A rudimentary method to deal with this would be to have the target lie flat on the ground and have the other players pile up on top of him to form a dog pile. Now that the Shadow Mist assassin was unable to attack the targeted player within, and the others were not its target of aggro, which would not shift either, would that not mean that the players could have free rein and slowly whittle it to death? Of course not. That was precisely the condition to cause the Shadow Mist assassin to enrage. The moment the Shadow Mist assassin was unable to land its attack on the target, it would then become enraged. Furthermore, after the Shadow Mist assassin became enraged, its attack power and speed would visibly change, while its aggro formula would surreptitiously change. This new aggro formula was all the more severe, as the boss would randomly attack any target within its aggro range without any rules whatsoever. Even Yixiao had no idea who it would target once this happened. That first attack targeting Goofy upon emerging from the fog after it became enraged was entirely coincidental, a mishap that made everybody fail to realize that the aggro formula had changed. It was only after Eternal Dominion had executed Seismic Toss, which resulted into the Shadow Mist assassin abruptly kicking him, that the quick-witted and experienced young Master Han started to have an inkling that something was amiss. If the aggro had been concentrated on Goofy, no other factors would make this change. This meant that there was no way the boss would attempt any sort of retaliation to the others aside from Goofy. Even though its speed and attack power had increased tremendously, young Master Han felt that the design of this boss's aggro formula was foolish. He had long considered the method of doing a dog pile the moment he had seen through this weakness, but because Goofy was effectively dealing with the boss as he was, he felt that there was no need to resort to such a crude method. In fact, young Master Han already felt something amiss when the boss attempted to kick Eternal Dominion, But before he could even properly ponder over this, the Shadow Mist Assassin had already dashed over to Royal God Call and insta-killed the hunter, smugly entering the fog once more. What just happened? Everybody was in shock. The aggro formula has changed, young Master Han said. Stay within range of one another. Everybody immediately shifted closer to one another, as Brother Assist furrowed his brows. But why would it be royal? If we go by how threat is usually calculated, it should be war without wounds, eternal dominion, and each of you should have accrued a higher threat than royal. I'm afraid the boss has now adopted a random attack formula. Young Master Han answered. Fuck, what a cheap move. Everybody cursed. Threat could be the key when challenging difficult bosses. To think that the aggro formula for this boss would change like this. Adopting a random attack formula now meant that the calculation of threat and subsequent aggro was thrown out of the window. No matter how they looked at it, this boss was clearly intentionally made to trouble the players. Random. I wonder how random this will be? Even at such a time, Brother Assist was still interested in researching more. Young Master Han wrinkled his eyebrows and did not say a word. Here it comes. This time it was Eternal Dominion that alerted everyone. The Shadow Mist Assassin came charging in his direction, but nobody knew who its current target was. It's really fast. Now that the Shadow Mist Assassin was enraged, even the time it spent hiding in the fog was reduced and soon came back on the attack. Hurtling out of the fog undauntedly, it suddenly leapt into the air and seemed about to execute a plummeting aerial assault once more. Brother Assist, it's on you. Gufei and Eternal Dominion yelled this out at the same time as they rushed toward it. From the posture it held while mid-air, the two men had already determined the general direction it would be plummeting, and it was where Brother Assist happened to be standing. Now that the most inexperienced combatant Brother Assist had become its target, he was so panicked that he even forgot how to hold his sword properly. This time, however, everybody was close by. Furthermore, it was Gufei's belief that this plummeting aerial assault from the Shadow Mist Assassin was the easiest to deal with because it gave them much more time to prepare. Eternal Dominion, who was somewhere in front of Brother Assist, was the quickest and nearest, yet he was still unable to completely dart in front of the knight. In the end, he stretched out his hands, as if he were diving down to the ground, and a much larger shockwave shield formed within his two palms. The size and defense of the shockwave shield were proportionate to the amount of mana he expended, and what he had just used was the limit of what he could activate at the moment. Nevertheless, this impedance was not enough to fully contain the rushing impact from the Shadow Mist Assassin. The shockwave shield broke like tofu, as Eternal Dominion's entire body was sent flying. The trajectory of this flight sent him toward Brother Assist, who staggered backward upon collision. A figure darted from behind him, an electric glow pulsing in his hand. Palm of Thunder. Gufei managed to gather lightning in his hand in the additional time Eternal Dominion had managed to buy them and firmly placed it directly on the Shadow Mist Assassin's temple. Repulse. Gufei prayed wordlessly. The repulsion effect from his Palm of Thunder was originally 100%. But he was uncertain if that was still the case when facing against a boss in this game. All he knew was that back when he was being hunted down by the NPC guard, it barely even moved upon taking a direct hit with the skill. He had successfully repelled the Shadow Mist Assassin previously, but he had blinked behind the boss then and struck him square in the back. It was the Palm of Thunder and his technique of leveraging the force of the enemy's hit that caused the effect. Now that the Shadow Mist Assassin was dashing directly at him while enraged, what would happen? Success. That one palm strike on its temple allowed the Palm of Thunder's repulse effect to send the boss away. But before Gufei could even celebrate his success, he saw that the Shadow Mist Assassin had only been pushed back for about 5 meters, so even though it was repulsed by his skill, the efficacy of his blow was significantly reduced. Moreover, it appeared as if the patience of this boss had increased after becoming enraged. Instead of immediately diving into the fog as what everybody had hoped it would do, it drove its foot into the ground and attempted another attack. It had also very deviously chosen another target. Young Master. Gufei yelled out. The target the Shadow Mist Assassin had chosen this time was actually young Master Han. As Gufei and Eternal Dominion were unable to provide any sort of assistance in time and could only watch the Shadow Mist Assassin pounce on him, Another dagger came stabbing in from the side. Sword Demon. He was the only person that would be using a dagger. Their weapons clashed. If even a sturdy warrior like War Without Wounds could be sent flying, Sword Demon would fare even worse. However, the man had already expected this to happen, so the moment he was sent flying, he was able to deliver a cut to the boss with a raise of his hand. This cut was better than nothing. The Shadow Mist Assassin's attention did not seem to shift, and its dagger continued to plunge toward young Master Han, but a white light from young Master Han's magic staff floated over to himself at the same time. Young Master Han had no way to evade the strike that had sent him flying away, but with a wave of his staff mid-flight, another shining radiance cocooned him. Everybody turned to stare at young Master Han when he landed on the ground, but instead of disappearing in the usual white light, he got up and gazed disdainfully at everyone. "Do you think it's so easy for me to die? Unnatural. Too damn unreal." Brother Assist may be unable to comprehend the underlying nuance behind the kung fu of Gu Fei and martial practitioners, but he could clearly grasp what young Master Han had just done with his skill, which was a perfect casting of heel that was accurate down to the millisecond. It took time for the player's HP to drop to zero. Thus, although this time was but a mere instant, it was so quick even the naked eye could not tell when the damage would be applied. Yet, young Master Han was able to sneak in a heel in this instant. His calculation and senses were all pushed to the limits just to catch this instant. Even Gu Fei felt that this man could become quite the talent if he were to practice kung fu. The Shadow Mist Assassin retreated after it attacked young Master Han. Everyone could not help but thank their lucky stars, for if it were to attack again, no matter who it targeted, the next victim would most likely be finished off without much hassle. They were all drained from just dealing with these two attacks from the Shadow Mist Assassin this time around. Feeling pressed for time, they tried to recover as fast as they could. "It comes and goes so quickly. We don't have much time to replenish our HP and mana," Gu Fei said as he bit on an apple. "There's absolutely no way we can take down this assassin if it continues to fight like this." War Without Wounds was the only one left unscathed from that previous assault. "Maybe, that's why it comes and goes like this. Bosses are made for players to slay, after all, so if there's truly no way to fight it, then what's the point of playing the game?" Young Master Han pointed out. "But aren't the random attacks it does far too messy? Can we still take it on?" Brother Assist asked, adding, "Sword Demon, you seem to have managed to get a slice at him just now." Sword Demon grimaced, "It was just a cut, I didn't even use my skill, so I doubt I managed to penetrate its defense." Everybody's gaze gathered on Gu Fei. Gu Fei looked embarrassed, sighing, "Don't look at me. I can perhaps give it a shot if it continues to target me like before, but now that we can't even confirm who its target is gonna be, it's really very difficult to deal with it." "Then, are we doomed to be wiped here?" "Motherfucker. We just wiped Southern Lone Blade's entire squad. It's too soon for retribution." War Without Wounds tilted his head up to the skies and heaved a long sigh, showing the look of a hero facing his end. This was when young Master Han suddenly asked, "Any of you have friends in Xiao City?" "Acquaintances are fine as well." Young Master Han added this before anyone could say another word. "Slayers?" Gu Fei suddenly thought aloud. He had courteously added Slayers as a friend after explaining the whole situation to her. Gu Fei even asked her when she would find others to come and rob him, which caused Slayers to turn frigid for a bit. "Oh, that's right. Let me contact her." War Without Wounds immediately became energetic. He had also added Slayers' sister Yenziazu as friends. He hurriedly pulled out his friends list and was just about to compose a message when he suddenly gazed sheepishly at everyone. "What should I say to her?" Young Master Han glared at him contemptuously for a while before saying, "Tell her our coordinates and then ask her where the nearest grinding map is. The more populous it is, the better." These men immediately came around to his idea. "You intend to?" Young Master Han flashed a smile that was 10 times more devious than the smile Yi Xiaoyu had shown. "It randomly attacks, right? Whoa, that's way too despicable. Can you not be such an abhorrent cat?" Everyone clamored. "We can't do that." Gu Fei and Eternal Dominion promptly expressed their refusal to this plan. Even though this was just a game, the moral code that these two men had sworn themselves to was not affected one bit. After all, This was something their upbringing had emphasized on the most. If they could not even demonstrate this level of righteous morality, they would not even be allowed to learn Kung Fu. Young Master Han stared at the two, yet he said nothing but a simple, "Suit yourself." Sword Demon suddenly blurted out in this moment, "Don't you guys think that this boss has been gone for too long? Yeah, it's definitely past the time limit." Brother Assist checked his booklet. He enjoyed recording down almost anything and everything. War Without Wounds raised his head to the rest and said, "Slars said that we are already in the most popular grinding map." Chapter 447, Irrational. The whole lot of them were already somewhere a good distance away from where they had first encountered the boss. Because each time he clashed with a Shadow Mist assassin, Gufei would find himself being sent flying. The group had no choice but to chase after him time and again as he got involuntarily displaced. Unknowingly, they had since fought their way to a grinding map. They were unaware of this because they had not chanced upon any monsters or other players, but this fact was plain for them to see now that Slaras had pointed it out and that the boss had not returned from its sojourn in the mist. Young Master Han laughed coldly. "I'm not to blame for this, right?" Nobody said a word. They all knew what he had been planning the moment young Master Han had asked them to find out where the most populous grinding map was. He intended to draw the boss all the way to such a place so that they could escape once the boss's aggro shifted to a stranger. The aggro of the boss ever since it became enraged was entirely strange and hard to comprehend. Just its range of aggro alone was excessive. Even considering the limited range of vision inside the city, players were still able to make out things within 20 or 30 meters. Meanwhile, this boss was able to hide beyond the player's vision before initiating a sudden attack. This meant that its aggro range was outside of 30 meters, which was something unheard of. What made this all the more ridiculous was the fact that this boss would randomly select its target by its volition, meaning, it was capable of ignoring any player that was looking to generate threat and would attack players who did not even make an attempt to it, like Royal God Call before. Royal God Call had truly suffered an injustice a lot worse than W''S1. Once such a boss traveled to a populous area, any players that were within 30 meters of its range would all have a chance of becoming its target. Even scarier was the fact that not one player out there would be able to sense this hidden danger once the weather inside the city was added into consideration. With this boss at the heart, the area around would transform into a figurative black hole that removed a level from all the players it crossed paths with, and it was a mobile one. 2. Just who is the idiot that has designed this thing? Young Master Han once more wondered about this to himself as he brought up his suggestion from before again. Nobody would have guessed that Gufei and Eternal Dominion would still insist on rejecting it. Young Master Han did not agree with this at all. Actually, considering their condition back then, he already felt that they would have trouble attempting to lure this boss for any discernible distance, but still figured it was a suggestion worth trying. He had not expected the two men to hold such noble ethics and conduct that they would rather sacrifice themselves than cause others to die on their behalf. Young Master Han had no choice but to dismiss the idea eventually. Never had he thought that luck would be on his side this time, and that they would unwittingly move the boss over to this grinding map. "What the heck are you guys waiting for?" Young Master Han asked. Gufei and Eternal Dominion exchanged glances, and they both headed in the direction where the Shadow Mist assassin had disappeared. "We're gonna go take a look." The two were well aware that their presence might not change anything, but neither of them felt comfortable using this opportunity to flee. Everybody had this line of morality that acted as the threshold. A person might waver and hesitate if they were alone, but with two of them together, they would naturally work to support each other. Even though they might not achieve anything substantial, at least they would have a clear conscience. "Fuck, are people who learned a few moves all such righteous Samaritans?" Young Master Han scoffed. Who knew where his line of morality lay? The fact that he was able to think of something as despicable as making scapegoat out of the innocent to save his own hide simply showed how contrastingly distant they were when it came to their ethics. Sword Demon, on the other hand, was a lot more upstanding. Seeing that Gufei and Eternal Dominion were heading off together, he was also inspired by their actions and resolutely nodded his head. "I'll go take a look, too." "Let's head off if we're gonna go, then." Young Master Han disregarded his life as much as he disregarded others. He would not even frown or hesitate when he had to sacrifice others or himself. Brother Assist clutched his booklet tightly. "I'll go take a look as well." Having spent so much of his time collecting and analyzing game information with such zeal, how could Brother Assist resist this opportunity? Now that all his companions had gone, would War Without Wounds attempt to flee just by himself? How would he face the others if he did that? Even though he felt it was a real waste to give up this opportunity, he had no choice but follow the rest with generous strides. The Shadow Mist Assassin had previously homed in on Gu Fei's position and was always the one initiating the fight. Now, nobody knew where it went after it returned into the fog. All they knew was that it was impossible for it to remain immobile, since not once did the boss reappear in the same direction as when it dove into the fog. None of them had any other choice but to head in the general direction it had disappeared to. Following along in that direction, they did not chance upon any trace of the Shadow Mist Assassin aside from the screams from players that rang out from time to time. They hurried toward in the direction of these sounds, only to find that the Shadow Mist Assassin had gotten away yet again. Along the way, they met plenty of players and monsters, but they still did not bump into the Shadow Mist Assassin again. Even after inquiring about the matter from the players they met and chasing in the direction where the boss had supposedly disappeared to, they nevertheless still came up empty-handed. They were now properly in the crowded grinding map, with plenty of players all around them. All the players had somehow become like a springboard for the Shadow Mist Assassin, killing 2 or 3 every time it surfaced before disappearing into the fog again. It randomly found itself a new target and continued along its merry way, killing and bounding. The only chance Gu Fei and the others could bump into the boss again would be if it coincidentally appeared beside them or they got chosen as its target. There was no way they could catch up to the Shadow Mist Assassin considering the movement speed it possessed. Slowly, the screams from the players became more and more distant from them, and before long, it disappeared altogether. The Shadow Mist Assassin had actually left them all in its dust and bloodshed. The few of them regarded one another, utterly at a loss on what to do. This would actually happen? War Without Wounds found it hard to believe. When is it gonna stop killing if it carries on like this? Gu Fei asked a rhetorical question. This special aggro formula seems to have only appeared after it got enraged. Perhaps, it would all return to normal once the state ends? Brother Assist posited. Is there even a time limit for a boss's enraged state? Sword Demon had never yet come across such a thing in his years of gaming. Why wouldn't there be? Young Master Han said, after eliminating all the players it has aggro on, and with nothing left to do, the boss will of course remove all sorts of status. Its HP will recover fully, too. Killing all of its aggro targets? Eternal Dominion wiped the imaginary sweat off his forehead. But this boss randomly selects its aggro target. War Without Wounds exclaimed. So that means? Young Master Han shrugged. This is a bug? Brother Assist said. That's right. I've already opened a ticket report to the GM, young Master Han informed. Did the GM reply? Yes. What did they say? Please describe in detail the issue you're now facing. We will do our best to serve you. Young Master Han repeated what he had received. Fuck, so what did you reply with? This was clearly an automated response from the officials. Bosses slaughtering the city, answered young Master Han. Everybody was speechless. Thus, Brother Assist began to carefully report the situation to the GM in detail, basing his argument off the evidence and findings he presented as if he were showing off his talent. This was when Gu Fei's ears suddenly pricked up. Listen. What? Ugh! A scream was heard. The boss is back! Everybody exclaimed in unison, but the tone in which they said this differed, with some expressing glee, shock, and complaint. This way! Gu Fei could hear where the sound was coming from and rushed forth, with the others following closely behind. They could still see the players within the fog conscientiously grinding. Gu Fei suddenly had an idea. Turning to the nearby players that were grinding, he shouted, "Quickly run! There's an enraged boss running amok." Boss? Where? The eyes of those players who had heard him instantly twinkled with passion. The more perceptive player disdainfully regarded Gu Fei. Ignore him. He's probably trying to trick us off our grinding spot. Do you think yours truly haven't seen that trick before? I'm serious. There's a really powerful boss out here, Gu Fei insisted. How powerful? taunted the crowd. Goofy truly wished he could dash right up and kill these two players with a slash to show them that that was how powerful the Shadow Mist Assassin was, but he of course did not do that. Just as he did not know what he should do, young Master Han lifted his finger and said, "Shut up and listen." Screams and even curses were heard. "Do you guys hear that? That's the sound of an enraged boss rampaging through this area wherever it goes. You can stay here and wait for it to appear if you aren't afraid of dying," young Master Han said. Screams could often be heard from time to time in grinding maps, so most people would not usually find hearing these sounds to be strange. However, upon paying closer attention, they could discern that these screams were quite different from usual. Usually, players would accidentally be struck by the monsters, and that was it, but the screams they were hearing today were far more blood-curdling. The screams sounded like when a player found themselves surrounded by a mob of monsters, and there were also plenty of curses and swear words being flung in these screams today. It seemed that the players were all stunned and were unable to make sense of what was happening, as if something inexplicable were indeed happening to them. "So why aren't you guys fleeing?" Some were still suspicious. Hee. Young Master Han laughed. "It's because we are fools. We had a chance to flee but, instead, intentionally came seeking for our deaths." The man he was speaking to was dazed. He found what this person's words to be odd. He looked like a woman, too, which was really revolting. Goofy knew that young Master Han had just insulted him in a roundabout way, but he merely chuckled dismissively before sincerely addressing all the players present. "We're not lying. You guys better run while you can. Or you can stay and be fools with us," young Master Han quipped. Finally, somebody wavered. Goofy also felt that he had said enough. There was no need for him to go and hug their legs just to beg them not to send themselves to their deaths, right? Thus, he pointed in the direction behind him and said, "Let's head over there." With that, Goofy continued his way onward, as the rest of the group followed right behind. The players that had been grinding were all in a daze for quite some time when someone suddenly realized, "Fuck, we're the real fools here. That guy wanted to trick us all so that we won't compete with them for the boss." It was as if they had all woken up from a dream. Not only did none of them prepare to leave, they tidied up their equipment and inventory and came cursing and swearing right after the 6 men. The considerate Goofy, who had tried to warn them out of the kindness of his heart, instead became the person of ire to all these people, who were relentlessly cursing him directly with uncouth words. Goofy was not in the least bit bothered by being maligned by the crowd as he continued forward minding his business. Unfortunately, there were people in this world that would take things a step too far when they realized they were being ignored. Goofy was fine if they were just tossing accusations and taunts, but they crossed the line when they started becoming more and more boorish and crude with their words, going so far as to even drag his ancestors and elders into their insults. This was precisely what Goofy, a man who was brought up to respect his teachers and elders, could not take lying down. As such, the man halted in his step and turned around, locking his gaze at the whole lot of them as he calmly said, "It's fine if you don't believe me. Curse at me all you want, but don't go too far with your words." The crowd was stunned as well when Goofy, who had been silent all the way, turned around to say this. However, someone, who quickly realized that they held superiority in numbers, pointed at Goofy as he howled, "What, you trying to intimidate us?" "Nope, it's a warning," Goofy said. "We're gonna curse you. What are you gonna do about it?" "Fuck you." A blink and a twin incineration. That man disappeared before he could even finish his sentence. Goofy stowed his sword away and glanced at the others. "Send a message to that guy and tell him, that's what I do about it." Chapter 448, The Strongest Spear and Shield. Silence. Everybody was more or less prepared for Goofy to raise his hands in anger, but the outcome of this one attack was truly frightening beyond any of their imagination. Was that a twin incineration? This person could not even believe what he had just seen with his eyes. Nobody answered him, as their eyes were all fixed on Goofy. From time to time, screams could be heard from the fog beyond, which only seemed to further rattle their heartstrings. Goofy did not say another word as he abruptly turned to continue his way. Everybody was standing petrified where they were, each of them looking at one another, at a loss on what to do. This anecdote here tells us that, in a world where sinister thoughts pervade people's hearts, it is rarer to find someone who will believe your story without a valid reason. Young Master Han ignored Gu Fei's stormy look as he said this to the others, as though he were talking to himself. The others were quiet. Adding oil to a burning flame was not something everybody would do. Gu Fei did not really react to this, though, merely calmly saying to the others, "Let's carry on." They hurried on, following the screams that broke through the fog from time to time. Gu Fei continued to give the players they met along the way his friendly prompt about the Shadow Mist Assassin, except he was no longer as sincere and passionate as before and was coldly saying a few words to these people. Who would have thought that more people believed him when he delivered the news in such a curt and blunt manner? More and more players took Gu Fei's warnings as advice and left in a hurry. Naturally, there were still some that doubted his words, but at least they did not bump into any groups that acted as vile as that first group, which Gu Fei found as comforting. Meanwhile, War Without Wounds suddenly realized the significance of Gu Fei's action. "We will be the only ones left with everybody is slowly leaving. Wouldn't that mean that the boss will find its way back to us?" These men all stared at him, causing War Without Wounds to appear stunned. "What, did I say something wrong?" "No, we are just shocked that you've only realized this now," young Master Han said. "I didn't think about this too much at the beginning." War Without Wounds tried to defend himself. Gu Fei suddenly interjected, "You guys should leave as well." "What are you talking about?" They were all stunned. They had been traveling together all this while, so they found it baffling that Gu Fei would suddenly ask them all to leave like this. "I didn't really think too much about this matter at first, but what War Without Wounds just said instantly reminded me," Gu Fei explained. "This boss might be really strong once it's enraged, but the main issue we have with it lies in our inability to discern who its target is. However, if there's no one else around, wouldn't that mean that we will know who it chooses to target? In that case, I think if Eternal Dominion and I work together, we should be able to overcome it." Gu Fei finished and glanced over to Eternal Dominion, who agreed with his assessment. "There shouldn't be any problems." "That is why you guys should leave first," Gu Fei said. These experts felt like crying. Even though Gu Fei had not explicitly mentioned it, they could already read between the lines what he was saying. "You guys are of no help hanging around here." Conversely, they were messing up the boss from targeting the two martial practitioners, so it was better if they left. Despite the case, these men had no choice but to admit that what Gu Fei had said made sense. While they still had reservations as to whether these two men were capable of taking on an enraged boss, they could not afford to dither at this point, and all that was left was to try. The four did not dawdle or hesitate as they all nodded. "Then, it's up to you two." With that, the four men actually ran off in four different directions, as if they had all originally planned this. "What are you guys doing?" Gu Fei was puzzled. Young Master Han turned his head back to answer, "If you guys are gonna be the hero here, you could at least give us the role of the bit part, yeah?" Gu Fei was confused. It was still Sword Demon who was honest. "We're going our separate ways so as to persuade all the surrounding players to leave as soon as possible. All the two of you have to do is to continue following the screams." Gu Fei was taken aback by this unexpected development. These guys were usually conceited and beheld contempt for most things. One was always gloomy and stoic, others enjoyed exploiting people and were deplorable as well as licentious, and another was always talking about stats that nobody understood a word of. But when it came to crucial moments like this, all their minds worked together as one. "You guys." Gu Fei was at a loss for words. In the end, he saw young Master Han facepalm and then say, hey, you can't possibly be thinking that we are planning to sacrifice ourselves for the sake of others like you, right? Buddy, we only split up into 4 ways because there's a larger chance for the other 3 to stay alive. Informing the others along the way is just something we are doing incidentally. Don't read too much into this." Gu Fei was truly left speechless. He caught a glimpse of Sword Demon chuckling before turning around and being the first to leave. Brother Assist and War Without Wounds also ran into the fog soon after. Young Master Han picked out a bottle of liquor, chugged it down in one gulp, and commiserated indignantly, "Yours truly is extremely smart, but why is it I can never predict when I will run out of liquor? Could it be that even someone as smart as me is unable to truly fathom myself?" With that, the man disappeared into the fog, leaving just the sound of a shattered bottle. Gu Fei and Eternal Dominion were the 2 people left. their resolute gazes remaining unchanged. "Pay attention to the sounds," Gufei said. Eternal Dominion nodded his head. The direction where the sounds came from kept changing. The two men corrected their advancement using these sounds, as if they had no idea how to give up. They were no match for the boss in speed, so all they could do was work hard at closing in the gap in order to increase their chances of the boss finding them. Meanwhile, the effect of the four men's departure could already be seen, as they began to see fewer and fewer players in this originally crowded grinding zone. Even without the four of them persuading these players, the truth itself was far more convincing. More and more players witnessed their teammates or those players nearby getting insta-killed by the sudden appearance of the boss from the fog, so there was no need for anyone to tell them twice. Many of them had already realized how dangerous things were and were already making their escape soon. That was the feeling the two men shared. The boss had not stopped its killing spree, but the two of them soon discovered that they seemed to be circling around a small area. It was evident that due to the departure of the other players around, the boss's aggro was now concentrated into this area where there were still players hanging around. Since Gufei and Eternal Dominion were also in this area, it would be a matter of time before they encountered boss. Motherfucker. At some corner, young Master Han was finally ambushed from behind by the boss within the fog. He had tried his best to save himself, but it was unfortunate that the damage he had sustained from the blow was simply too severe. Young Master Han very quickly saw his life diminish to zero. He landed on the ground heavily after being sent flying, groping through his dimensional pocket before swearing. "I can finally go buy some more liquor," young Master Han thought to himself, as he waited to respawn back at the spawn point. Who would have thought that, by the time he landed and the number depicted on his HP showed 0, the familiar white light was nowhere in sight. "What's going on? God damn it. Has yours truly really turned into a corpse?" Young Master Han had not thought that such a situation was possible. When he thought of it, he had never really died in this MMO before, so could this be perhaps what happened when one died? He sneaked a peek over at by his side and saw another player staring at back him. "Brother assist." Young Master Han opened his mouth and discovered that his voice could still come out. "You got killed as well?" Brother Assist asked. "What's going on?" Young Master Han asked. "Do we need to act as a corpse for a while after dying?" "That doesn't seem to be how it works." "I don't know, but look over there." Brother Assist moved his eyelid as best as he could. Young Master Han could not move his head, so all he could do was roll his eyes as much as he could in the indicated direction. It seemed that there was another player lying on the ground, immobile. Just what in the world is going on? That was the question on everyone's mind. ARGH. Fuck. A spiteful howl sounded through the fog, which was somewhat close to where Gufei and Eternal Dominion were at. "Over there." Both of them shouted as they bounded over. Seeing a figure pouncing right toward them, both men swiftly evaded to the side and prepared to attack, but realized in time that this person was not a boss. Aside from being larger, its equipment was wrong too, and more importantly, this person was very familiar. Thud. This person, whom Gufei recognized, collapsed to the ground in a cloud of dust. He waved his hand before his nose and mouth to clear the dust and called out, "Wounds?" "I'm here," the person in the dust cloud replied. "Where's the boss?" "Over there," War Without Wounds replied. "What happened to you?" "I died." "How can you still be talking if you're dead?" "Yeah, I find that strange as well," War Without Wounds expressed. Gufei paid no further heed to him, as the latter took a backseat in his heart. "Go recover your HP a bit," Gufei said this as he and Eternal Dominion rushed out. The last they heard from the man was him complaining in a slowly fading voice, "Recover, my ass. My HP is already 0. But this damn game isn't allowing me to respawn." "Did my game freeze?" "Freeze?" Gamers born from the era of online MMOs of this age-old term. This was a term that should not apply to a fully immersive MMO like Parallel World, but they could not think any other explanation aside from this. Meanwhile, Gufei and Eternal Dominion had finally encountered the boss. "Looks like there are no longer any other players around." Gufei sighed in relief. "Yup, let's take care of it now." Eternal Dominion nodded his head. The feet of the Shadow Mist assassin stepped quickly, not slowing down in the least as it rushed forward. Having slain so many players, It simply had no concept of what mercy was. This one charge looked to be as fast and potent like a gust of wind, and its target was Gufei. Shockwave Shield. Eternal Dominion flipped his two hands, pushing out his hands, which were conjoined at the base, vertically. There was no need for such complex hand gestures to unleash Shockwave Shield, but the hand posture that Eternal Dominion had gone with was one of the techniques in the Dragon Fist style that he was very adept with. Dragon swallowing the clouds. It was a defensive maneuver that would mitigate the opponent's attack extensively. It was unknown if this would have any effect when used against a boss, but he figured they could find out now by putting it to the test. Naturally, the real defensive skill, Shockwave Shield, emerged right before his palms as well. On Gufei's end, he condensed a palm of thunder in his left hand and lashed out a twin incineration on his right. This was also the ultimate technique within the Gu family sword style, floating clouds during sunset. The sword strike was just the first sequence of the technique. The palm strike that followed would actually be the killing move. With Eternal Dominion's Kung Fu Guard working in tandem with his Shockwave Shield, it would surely afford a defense far stronger than any Guardian's shield. Gufei possessed a powerful spell power, and he was without a doubt the strongest damage dealer currently in the game. It could be said that this combination of the strongest shield and the sharpest spear in game was born with these two men currently working together. Chapter 449, Emergency Protocol. The sharpest spear and the strongest shield. The moment the Shadow Mist Assassin's dagger pierced that strongest shield, a blow from the sharpest spear connected to its head. The Shockwave Shield instantly shattered the moment the Shadow Mist Assassin's attack connected, but it was at least able to serve as some defense, allowing Eternal Dominion to more calmly use his Kung Fu to mitigate that strike. Using strength to mitigate strength, the principle behind Dragon swallowing the clouds was that simple, but outsiders had no idea just how to utilize it and mitigate an attack. Even though this was just a game, and their opponent was a NPC, be it a player or a NPC, every action within the game had to follow the laws of physics. While there were occasions where it might go against common sense, it would not be totally nonsensical overall. That was why this attack from the Shadow Mist Assassin could be mitigated by Eternal Dominion's efforts. This was something Gufei, who lacked the strength, could not achieve. The Tai Chi concept of using a little strength to overcome a powerful force was nothing but a vivid exaggeration. In reality, it simply leveraged on skillfulness and technique to overcome strength. The average person would not know this, however, so they would only imagine it to be the current state of excessive hyperbole. In truth, when two strengths were pit against one another, the difference between the two could not be too great. Otherwise, even the application of the said concept would be useless. Given how weak Gufei's strength stat was, while he might be able to occasionally overpower certain players through the utilization of this concept, Gufei was well aware of his limits when facing against a boss that was at level 60. In the end, the Shadow Mist Assassin did not react much to that sword slash Gufei had dished out. Eternal Dominion, for his part, had expended all his strength just to mitigate that one strike, resulting in both his arms to shatter upon impact and for the Shadow Mist Assassin's attack to actually be redirected in another direction. Eternal Dominion considered this as a sort of failure. The technique Dragon swallowing the clouds was not supposed to redirect the enemy's strength but to swallow it in its entirety and to diminish the strength until it was indiscernible. Instead, the fact that Eternal Dominion was only able to redirect the Shadow Mist Assassin's attack in another direction shows that even he did not bear the strength to fully mitigate it to naught, and all he could do was to go for the next best outcome. Still, he was not left discouraged by this. Now that he was able to redirect the attack over to his side, Eternal Dominion immediately followed up with a counterattack of his own. He reached both his hands out, locked them into the boss's waist, and used his seismic toss on it. The Shadow Mist Assassin, which had flown up in the air, used its leg to counterattack just like before. This was the weakness showdown of a man versus machine, for it was only able to judge the immediate gains and losses that occurred but unable to identify the greater dangers that lurked in the unknown. The boss sent a kick toward Eternal Dominion while mid-air. It was a kick that Eternal Dominion, who had already taken it before, was prepared for and responded accordingly by crossing his two arms to block. Simultaneously, Gufei leapt to follow the Shadow Mist Assassin up in the air. Brushing past it, He executed the second half of his floating clouds during sunset technique after having landed his palm of thunder on the boss moments ago. Eternal Dominion, who was witnessing every exchange, was no longer focused on the Shadow Mist Assassin's current state. All he did was gasp as he took in the splendor of Gu Fei's technique, wondering if he would be able to evade this follow-up move if he were the one fighting against Gu Fei. This attack Gu Fei had landed in the air was dealt in the same direction as the repulse effect from his palm of thunder and applying more power and damage to the Shadow Mist Assassin. As a result, the boss was sent flying off even faster and zooming off right into the fog without having to initiate this itself. The two successfully collaborated on that attack, and Eternal Dominion punched his fist in the air to show his excitement. Gu Fei ignored this entirely, not wasting any time as he pulled out an apple and began munching on it. Eternal Dominion had only expended mana on a Shockwave shield before and after, while the rest depended on his strength and technique to resist that boss's attack. Meanwhile, Gu Fei had unleashed Twin Incineration and Palm of Thunder in order to deal the maximum damage, which used up a huge portion of his mana. If he did not replenish what he could when the opportunity presented itself, he would have difficulty dishing out damage as efficiently as he had just demonstrated during the next round. With the two men collaborating to such a degree, even though the Shadow Mist Assassin was in a state of enrage, its patterns of attack did not increase or change whatsoever. All it did was strengthen the few moves it had, which were all patterns that Gu Fei had already familiarized himself with. By giving Eternal Dominion any slight prompts, he too would be able to figure out the nuances behind these attacks as well. Since they were able to deal with it first assault, they would naturally be fine dealing with it the second time, third time. The boss's remaining targets were just the two of them by this point. Eternal Dominion was more than able to mitigate its attack if it chose to target him, while he already knew what he had to expect and prepare when the boss targeted Gu Fei, so the entire execution of this fight went very smoothly. Even though he would suffer some damage each time he redirected that aggressively powerful attack from the Shadow Mist Assassin, he would take every chance he got to consume some bread as Gu Fei munched on some fruit. Thus, they were able to hold out this long. The confidence within the two men grew as they carried on in this fashion. Beating the Shadow Mist Assassin was only a matter of time at the rate that they were going. That was if nothing even more insane cropped up, like becoming even more enraged. Were bosses able to enrage twice? There was temporarily no need for this discussion, as the gaming operations end had already been overwhelmed by the boss's first time of becoming enraged. That unsanctioned modification Yi Xiao had made was indeed ingenious. The system had deemed every action made after the Shadow Mist Assassin got enraged to be entirely working as intended, and it did not result in any reports of foul play. However, he had underestimated the many colleagues from the monitoring team that were presently watching the performance of this Shadow Mist Assassin. At first, the crowd was extremely excited by the fact the Shadow Mist Assassin got enraged, but they all became tongue-tied when they saw the boss give up its original target and directed its aggro toward the other nearby players, beginning its massacre in the grinding map. At the moment, the actions of the Shadow Mist Assassin were entirely in line with how it was configured, so the system did not consider this to be an abnormality that required reporting. However, to the game employees personally witnessing this match, they soon realized just how terrible the situation would become. This method of killing would only spiral out of control and continue endlessly. Chief Yi, this. Someone began to voice his doubt on Chief Yi but stopped himself. This was because the issue here was not the program per se. Rather, it was a huge flaw in the configuration of the boss Shadow Mist Assassin. Yi Xiao was already as pale as a ghost at this point. Even the members of the monitoring team could tell that the configuration of the boss was an issue. So how could a game designer like himself not realize what a torrent of disaster this Shadow Mist Assassin would become? Nobody waited for Yi Xiao to reply, as the immediate attention was to deal with this sudden situation within the game, and this was not something he was responsible for. The monitoring team that had been watching the spectacle all dispersed, with someone even asking him to leave the station he was seated at, so that they could begin to work on the issue. Yi Xiao heard that the monitoring team's supervisor was already reporting this matter to the higher-ups. Since this was not a situation that occurred as a result of players cheating but by a loophole in the game's design, It meant that this incident was similar to that ensuing slaughter by the boss which had previously wandered over to the city. Thus, the monitoring team did not dare bungle the handling of this matter, immediately requesting the higher-ups for further instructions to determine if this was a situation that called for intervention and the enactment of emergency protocols. At the same time, Brother Assist's detailed support ticket had also caught the attention of the GMs. Compared to young Master Han's joke response of "boss is slaughtering the city," Brother Assist's ticket was so meticulous that the GMs were unable to find an excuse to dismiss the issue. The GM he contacted immediately saw the tragedy that had struck the city. From Brother Assist's description of boss seems to have lost control and is engaging in an indiscriminate massacre. Furthermore, the power the GMs held was entirely directed at the players, allowing them to ban, suspend, or even delete players' account, but they had no power when it came to irregularities in the system configuration, such as the boss going berserk like this. As such, that GM also reported this matter to the higher-ups immediately. Actually, only one person was the higher-up. This higher-up was the senior lead of the game operations. Upon receiving so many reports on this one matter, he quickly made his way over to the monitoring office and spotted Yi Xiao among the crowd the moment he entered the room. "Xiao is here as well." The senior lead, who had come to oversee the commotion, greeted Yi Xiao, entirely unaware that the man was the instigator of the situation. The man even assumed Yi Xiao had arrived to participate in this matter's discussion. After all, he was a primary game designer for Parallel World. When this was happening, Gu Fei, Eternal Dominion, and the Shadow Mist Assassin had yet to exchange blows. The senior lead very quickly witnessed the endless massacre that the boss was initiating. Similarly, because he was unfamiliar with the backend configuration, he immediately asked Yi Xiao of what had led for this situation to occur. Yi Xiao answered him stiltedly. The supervisor of the monitoring team had already asked him the same question once before, and Yi Xiao identified it to be an issue that originated from the Shadow Mist Assassin's configuration. Yi Xiao told the truth. He summarized the current situation as the following: the Shadow Mist Assassin's aggro formula was a huge bug. His actions to combat the player bug that was Gu Fei had him triggering the Shadow Mist Assassin's enraged state, and that resulted in an even bigger bug. Countless players had lost their lives and levels as a result, and this matter had truly transcended into a disaster of epic proportions. The senior lead had no idea what to say upon hearing Yi Xiao's answer. Just like the supervisor of the monitoring team, the senior lead immediately determined that the biggest issue lay in the configuration of the boss itself, but because the game designer Yi Xiao was present, neither of them said anything more of the matter to save the man some face. Thus, the senior lead gave the order for the monitoring team to immediately resolve this crisis. At the same time, he contacted the employees working on the backend data to restore the losses incurred by those players that were implicated in this enraged boss incident. The work involved in this was far more difficult than just deleting the boss. The monitoring team could easily use the modification tool to remove the boss, but it was really troublesome to troubleshoot the data as ordered. The employees that were supervising the backend data cursed the high heavens but could only do as instructed. The boss had already killed more than half its share by this point, so they had to investigate the player data of those who had lost their lives to the boss before. Even as they hurried to track the boss's movement, they quickly made sure to lock on and freeze the data assets of the succeeding victims. This was also why young Master Han and the rest could not respawn after being killed. Their data assets had all been locked and frozen. This was not special treatment from the employees in any sense but merely their method of lessening their eventual workload. Meanwhile, the members of the monitoring team that were preparing to modify the boss suddenly stopped what they were doing. This was because there were no longer any players around the boss at this point, and the two players it was fighting had been entangled with it for many rounds, and they looked to have the ability to slay it. Everybody was staring at the screen, and the supervisor of the monitoring team turned to look over at the senior lead, pointing toward the two players taking on the boss. "Do we let them continue?" The senior lead looked at the HP of the boss and saw that it was left with but a sliver of health. Mulling over it for just a moment, he nodded. Continue. Chapter 450, Huge Restoration. The game employees were all dumbfounded as they witnessed the two men, Gu Fei and Eternal Dominion, toy with the enraged Shadow Mist assassin in the palm of their hands. What an exciting collaboration! Someone could not help but exclaim. The two players on the screen took up the role of attacker and defender, respectively. Their intricate combination allowed them to evenly bear the workload of facing the Shadow Mist assassin. As such, the greatest advantage of speed that the Shadow Mist assassin held did not appear to be as frightening as before. They worked in such a way that there was no need for Gufei to waste time defending when attacking, while there was no need for Eternal Dominion to find time to prepare an attack while defending. Yi Xiao was ever paler. He had presumed that Gufei would be unable to deal with the Shadow Mist assassin once its stats increased from the enraged state, but he had unfortunately failed to realize the skills Eternal Dominion possessed. It was only at this point that he realized, this fighter looked to be the same sort of person as that mage, boasting an impressive prowess that the average Joel lacked. How could this be? Yi Xiao muttered to himself. A colleague beside him saw his ghastly pallor, but having no idea what the man was thinking, this man simply attributed it to Yi Xiao feeling guilty about his design causing such mishap. This someone even tried to console him. Chief Yi, don't worry. This will all be settled soon. You'll just have to work hard on fixing this after. What could Yi Xiao say at this point? All he could do was bury his head and laugh bitterly. Fix it? Will I even have the opportunity to do that? Yi Xiao had a rather foreboding feeling about this. Gufei and Eternal Dominion were both of course unaware that there were so many pairs of eyes closely watching their progress. The two of them focused every bit of their soul and fiber of their body to deal with the attacks from the Shadow Mist assassin as they concentrated wholeheartedly to block and retaliate every time the boss struck. Finally, after Eternal Dominion threw the Shadow Mist assassin up in the air with his seismic toss, Gufei leapt right past it. The flaming arc he drew with his sword slashed across the Shadow Mist assassin. Its entire body set alight as it landed painfully on the ground and rolled about. Gufei heaved a sigh of relief. This was the end. It was finally over. The two of them had finally successfully slain this boss. I wonder what it would drop? If it is some top-grade equipment, we can definitely earn quite a bit of money selling it, Gufei told Eternal Dominion. Money. Eternal Dominion's eyes were like stars. I haven't expected that it's so easy to earn money in games. The Shadow Mist assassin began to drop its loot. Gold coins scattered all over as the boss rolled about on the ground. Eternal Dominion wanted to bound over in his excitement and pick them all up but was held back by Gufei. Wait a moment. It might be a trick. What trick could there be? Eternal Dominion did not understand. All Gufei could think about was his experience with bosses that faked their surrender, so he did not dare to be too careless. It was only until the Shadow Mist assassin lay on the ground, unmoving, and dropped all its loot that he truly believed that this boss was dead. Looks like he's really dead, Gufei said. Eternal Dominion quickly flung himself over to snatch the gold coins on the ground as quickly as he could, as if every coin would sink into the ground at any moment and could no longer be found. The eyes of a mouse can only see an inch of light. Gufei scoffed. Didn't I tell you that the truly valuable drops here are the top-grade equipment? With that, he stepped forward and picked up the dagger on the ground. Peering at it, he exclaimed, "Fuck, it's white tier." Nobody said anything about the boss only dropping top-grade equipment. Sometimes, it would also drop some common items. Gufei already had a dagger, and he was not about to start a collection, so he casually tossed it aside. That's still worth something if we sell it to the merchants, Eternal Dominion said as he scrambled to pick up the dagger Gufei had flung aside. The merchant he was talking about was the various NPCs that man the system-operated shops. Players could sell anything to them, but the price that they would offer was abysmally low. Look here. This is what's truly valuable, Gufei said, as he lobbed over the second item he picked up to Eternal Dominion. Skill scroll, Shadow Mist Assault, Assassin skill. Instantly appear behind a target to execute a high-speed strike and deal a powerful blow. How much do you think that is worth? Eternal Dominion asked as he examined it. We'll talk about that when we head back. Gufei did not mention that he had no idea himself. The third item he picked up is a book. Gufei saw Andrew Su's diary written on its cover. Andrew Su. Is that this guy's name? Gufei mumbled to himself as he casually browsed through the pages within. It looked to be a narrative of Andrew Su's tale after he was lost in the fog. Naturally, Gufei was not in the mood to properly read through it at the moment, so he casually placed it into his dimensional pocket and picked up the remaining 2 pieces of equipment still left on the ground. Fuck. Goofy swore twice and tossed them one by one, for the 2 items were both white tier equipment. This meant that this boss had only dropped 1 skill scroll and a weird diary, and there was no top grade equipment at all. Meanwhile, Eternal Dominion was seemingly oblivious to all that had happened, as he happily picked up all the coins the boss had dropped. The man carefully picked up every single gold coin that rolled off Andrew Sue, counting as he went. He ended up with a total of 241 gold coins. Adding to that bottle of liquor young Master Han had given him, which was worth 200 gold coins, he earned himself a total of 441 gold coins. Eternal Dominion was extremely elated once he did the math. The highest amount he had seen ever since he started playing this game was 200 gold coins, and that was the amount that a whole bunch of people had managed to raise for him for his job class advancement. Of course, this money was spent really quickly, and the amount of money he had never got past 3 digits after. Let's see if there's anything left on its body, Eternal Dominion muttered as he rifled through the Shadow Mist assassin's corpse. This was the outcome of every boss. Players would not even let them off in death. Goofy was contacting the other members of Young Master's Elite. Where are you guys? What? Did something happen? The one who replied was actually Royal God Call. Oh, we just killed the boss. And you? Goofy replied. Killed? What did it drop? Royal God Call hurried to ask. Nothing. Just an assassin skill scroll and some random diary which I don't even know what's it about, Goofy replied. Where are the rest, then? Royal God Call asked. I don't know. Why aren't they saying anything? Goofy called a few more times, but none of the others replied. Goofy tried to privately message them each but got no response from any of them either. What in the heck is going on? Goofy was perplexed. Royal God Call was also yelling over the mercenary channel. Quickly come and get me from the spawn point. Goofy was speechless. He really could not imagine what would happen if Royal God Call randomly spawned at Xiaota City from the very start when he had no friends. What sort of inhuman life would he lead? We're leaving, Goofy called out to Eternal Dominion as the 2 of them proceeded to head back to the city. They had come across War Without Wounds, who was sent flying to his death after being struck by the Shadow Mist assassin before, along the way, and Goofy decided to head over to take a look. In the end, he discovered that War Without Wounds was still where he was earlier. What was even more bizarre was that he remained in the same position as he previously was when Goofy left him. Goofy approached him, confused. What in the world are you doing? War Without Wounds was very dejected as well. I don't know. I can't move. My HP is 0. Why can't I respawn? Why didn't you guys reply when I sent a message? Goofy asked even as he came forward to try and lift War Without Wounds up to his feet. You sent a message? War Without Wounds was astonished. His mercenary channel and private conversation window were silent all this while. Goofy was also extremely surprised. This was because he had just found out that he could not touch War Without Wounds. This was the same configuration that was seen in the various safe zones in the game. It was a restriction placed by the system on the players. He wondered why it would appear here. What is going on? The 2 of them were baffled. Compared to these 2, Brother Assist and young Master Han came to a possible conclusion after analyzing the situation. Perhaps, the game company had discovered that the boss was too outrageous and had taken certain precautions, not allowing us to die, sealing us in this space. Perhaps, they are getting ready to restore us back to life? Brother Assist deduced. That's highly likely, young Master Han agreed with this assessment. Furthermore, they were both not in a location unlike War Without Wounds who is all alone. There were plenty of other players around them that were acting like corpses. None of them was able to move or send any sort of messages. All they could do was participate in the ongoing discussion. Some of these people even let their imaginations run wild. They were not satisfied with being merely restored back to life and were dreaming that the game company would provide them some sort of peerless item as compensation, replacing Goofy as the main character of this novel. The whole lot of employees in the game company watched Goofy and Eternal Dominion finish off the Shadow Mist assassin. There was a certain disagreement that occurred. Thereafter, one side believed that since the boss was ultimately defeated by players, this meant that this boss was not exactly so overpowered that players were unable to overcome it. so the losses every player had incurred would not need to be compensated. The other side held a firm belief that the fact that this boss got enraged was a design flaw by itself, a bug. Since they managed to discover this in time, they bore the responsibility to deal with it accordingly by providing the appropriate compensation to all the players. Considering this condition for the incident, it made no sense why the players should bear the losses from an error in game design. The ensuing debate between both sides wasted yet more time, until somebody reminded everyone that there were still plenty of players lying on the ground like corpses, waiting for a resolution. Thus, the game operations senior lead made the final decision to recompense the players. This was when the employees that were dealing with the backend data gave their feedback. There were no issues with restoring the data assets of those players that were frozen in place, resembling corpses, on the ground at the moment. There were also no problems restoring those deaths that they had not managed to lock down in time but were able to track down at the spawn points. The real issue began from those players that had died before they were able to do anything about this incident and had left the spawn points. These people's whereabouts were hard to track down. Consequently, they were worried that their efforts would be unable to do anything to those players in this final category. C. Someone, who was in support of the former argument, said, "It's no longer possible for us to completely give all these players recompense. If we only restore those that we are able to track down, won't that just be unfair to the small population of players that we fail to locate?" In the end, the game operations senior lead rolled his eyes at this man's comment. "If we don't compensate these players, all of them will find this entire affair unfair. If we do compensate these players, at least a good majority of them will feel that this is fair. Isn't it obvious what we should be doing here?" And so, the process of restoring the data began. The players, who had become corpses after the enraged Shadow Mist assassin had slain its way through them, suddenly found themselves able to move again with a fully restored HP. Those players that had dropped items upon their deaths saw the system return these items to them right before their eyes. Everybody climbed to their feet while feeling confused, continuing their discussion. "Exactly as we've thought." Brother Assist and young Master Han, who had long expected such a result, chuckled as they looked at each other. Meanwhile, it was Royal Godcall who was the most astonished by all this. He had patiently been waiting by the spawn point all this while when the scene around him suddenly changed in a flash, and he was thrown back into the fog from before. He rubbed his eyes in disbelief, unable to make sense of what had just happened to him.